The story opens within the gilded cage of the imperial palace, where the tranquility of the afternoon was shattered by a desperate scream, pleading with the monarch to reconsider. In the center of the grand hall stood a woman trembling with rage, proclaiming her status as the one and only empress of this vast empire. She declared herself the mother of the nation and his only legitimate wife. With anguish tearing at her voice, she screamed at the man before her, asking how he could discard her like trash. The man was Alexander Lorenzi, the ruthless emperor of the realm. He looked down at her with eyes colder than ice, demanding that Isabelle cease her arrogant display immediately. His voice dripped with disdain as he reminded her that she was never truly his only companion. Had she conveniently forgotten the existence of Empress Sasha? Isabelle tried to argue that the other woman was merely a consort, but this only ignited the emperor's fury. He hissed that she was completely delusional to think she held any real place in his heart. Isabelle stood frozen, her crimson hair disheveled and her emerald eyes drowning in devastation. The heartbreak was too much to bear, and fresh tears began to stream down her face. Ignoring the tragedy unfolding before him, the emperor pulled his lover close, cruelly stating that Isabelle could never hope to compare to the perfection of Sasha. He sneered, calling it a pity that a woman like her was so consumed by greed for the empress's title, coveting the crown just to force him to stay by her side. The other woman, possessing raven black hair and innocent lilac eyes, watched Isabelle silently, her expression unreadable. She buried her face in the emperor's chest, refusing to meet the fallen woman's gaze. Isabelle watched helplessly as the two walked away, leaving her alone in her sorrow. The arrogant emperor threw one last insult over his shoulder, reducing Isabelle to a mere decoration he had used to siphon political influence. He admitted he had only needed the power of Duke Blake, revealing the shattering truth that he had never loved her. His heart had always belonged solely to Sasha. The devastated woman collapsed onto the cold floor, her soul crushed by the cruel confession of the husband she had adored. Desperate, she called out to him one last time, begging him to wait, but Alexander ignored her cries completely. Suddenly, the sharp ring of a cell phone pierced the scene. Back in the real world, a young woman threw her phone down, shouting in pure outrage. She was absolutely furious at the emperor's heartless words. Why couldn't Isabelle just dump that trash husband and live her own best life? This frustrating story was the plot of the popular web novel, A Flower from Another World. It was a typical fantasy romance where a common girl rises to become empress, fighting to win the cold emperor's heart against all odds. But there was a massive plot hole that the reader just could not accept. Even if it was a political marriage, the emperor already had a lawful wife. Yet, the so-called heroine had the audacity to usurp the throne of the rightful empress. Blinded by his obsession with the new girl, the emperor had completely abandoned his legitimate partner, tossing aside his vows without a second thought. Because of this betrayal, Empress Isabelle withered away in a freezing, isolated room, succumbing to illness while her husband frolicked with his lover. Did the emperor feel any remorse? Absolutely not. The truth was, he didn't even glance back at her funeral, marrying his mistress the moment his wife was out of the picture. The reader was shell-shocked that such a scumbag male lead could exist. What crime had Isabelle committed to deserve such a hellish fate? Was her only sin loving him too much? She glanced at the clock, wondering how much longer these tragic characters could survive the author's cruelty. Realizing it was already 3 a.m., she decided to cut her losses and get some sleep before reality came calling. She had recently started a demanding new project at work and needed to be up early, but a lingering thought haunted her as she drifted off. Suddenly, a voice echoed through a strange palace, calling out for the Empress during tea time. A maid informed the red-haired woman that His Majesty had finally granted her an audience. The woman looked around, bewildered by the antique, colorful furniture surrounding her. The room was so incredibly spacious, she could run laps in it, and even the servants were dressed in fabrics more expensive than her entire wardrobe. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection staring back. This appearance was undeniably different from her own. Originally, she was just a Korean university student, but she had awakened in the kingdom of Castilia, trapped inside the novel A Flower from Another World as Isabelle herself. At first, she was convinced it was a vivid dream and pinched herself to wake up. However, pain was the only response. The nightmare was real. In the end, as the palace maids fussed over her, she was forced to accept the terrifying reality that she was no longer dreaming. Now, inhabiting Isabelle's body, she took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She knew Isabelle's clingy past was regrettable, but she refused to follow the original script. Perhaps it would be better to just let him have his mistress. One of the maids chirped excitedly, praising her effort and wondering how hard she must have worked just to get the Emperor's attention. Isabelle wondered if this Emperor they idolized was the male lead. To be honest, she had zero desire to see that trash of a man. He was the monster responsible for turning Isabelle's life into a living hell. She asked the maids to pause, then calmly ordered them to make her look as breathtaking as possible. The maids' faces lit up with joy, eager to serve their mistress's request. Isabelle reflected for a moment as the girls chatted excitedly. It was clear they genuinely wanted their empress to be loved by her husband. A pang of guilt struck her, but she steeled her resolve. She could not live someone else's tragic life, no matter what they hoped for. Adorned in elegant shoes and maintaining a regal posture, she approached the entrance to the emperor's private chambers. She seemed distant, lost in her strategies, until she finally arrived at the heavy doors of the emperor's study. He had made her wait for 2 long weeks, and when he finally summoned her, it was to his cold office rather than the intimacy of the imperial bedroom. Perhaps being direct was the only escape. The emperor's greeting is cold, lacking any warmth or ceremony. He seems almost startled by her presence. Isabelle's eyes widen the moment their gazes lock. His beauty is undeniable, the hallmark of a true male protagonist. Yet, his voice drips with arrogance as he demands the reason for this audience. She parries his question, asking if a husband and wife need a reason to meet. Alexander is clearly displeased with her defiance. With a dismissive wave, the arrogant ruler commands her to take a seat. Isabelle's mind races. Survival has always been a battlefield, and information is her only weapon in this hostile world. Before entering the lion's den, she dissected the tangled web connecting herself, Alexander, and the consort, Sasha. It has been 18 months since Sasha entered the imperial palace, and 18 months since the emperor's heart strayed. Suddenly, he cuts through the silence, asking if her resolve has wavered. A graceful smile masks her true intent. Isabelle nods, confirming that her mind is indeed made up. She has to act before he crushes her existence completely. Intrigue sparks in his golden eyes as he probes for the reason behind her shift. Isabelle drops the bombshell with triumphant resolve. She wants a divorce. Alexander freezes, his face a mask of pure shock as he demands an explanation. His voice drops, icy and dangerous. He reminds her who stands before her, warning that this is no place for idle jests. Disappointment washes over Isabelle. Though a part of her expected this stubborn arrogance, for years, she bore the weight of the crown silently, fulfilling every duty flawlessly just to earn a crumb of his affection. Yet, in the end, he chose Sasha. She meets his gaze squarely, assuring him that this is no joke. Isabelle explains that after deep reflection, she finds the Empress's crown too heavy for her to bear. Alexander listens, his expression unreadable. This is her ultimatum. She prays he will accept her decision and let her go, but he pushes back. How can the title be too much when she has ruled flawlessly by his side for 3 long years? Why the sudden change? Isabelle persists, insisting she is unworthy and ill-suited for the throne. Hope flickers in her eyes. She needs him to see past the politics and realize she is deadly serious. Alexander's expression darkens with contempt. Her words seem to annoy him more than anything else. Then comes the accusation. Is she throwing a tantrum because he hasn't visited her bed in 2 weeks? Isabelle is stunned by his ego. His tone shifts instantly. He blames the palace intrusion for his absence, begging for her forgiveness with sudden, jarring sweetness. He drips with honeyed words, vowing to visit her daily and striving to become the perfect husband she deserves. Isabelle listens, incredulous. She can hardly believe the performance he's putting on. She clutches her dress to steady her trembling hands. She must remain calm and not fall into his manipulative trap again. The memory of her tragic end burns in her mind. She refuses to walk that path of destruction a second time. Forcing a smile, she assures him that he will easily find a companion far more suitable than she ever was. She explicitly mentions the consort as her replacement. Alexander waves the comment away, telling her to ignore the other woman entirely. He claims Sasha's presence is merely a political necessity, a diplomatic pawn for the empire. Besides, he argues, the girl has been here for less than a year, she means nothing. He insists that Isabelle is irreplaceable. With gentle pressure, he urges her to stop worrying about such trivialities. Isabelle meets his gaze and realizes the depth of his delusion. He truly believes this is just a fit of jealousy. Facing his irrational promises, the Empress stands firm. She reveals that Sasha has nothing to do with her decision to leave. Maintaining a humble facade, she insists she simply doesn't deserve the throne. She prays her elegance and logic will reach him. The cruel emperor stares at her intently, his eyes boring into her soul, trying to unravel her true motives. Then, he plays his ace. He asks what she intends to do about her father, Duke Blake. Isabelle freezes, reflecting on the threat hidden in his words. Her family, once pillars of the aristocracy, has long since crumbled, losing both prestige and wealth to the sands of time. Desperate to restore glory, Duke Blake sold his daughter into this marriage. She had lived in happy ignorance of the contract's dark terms until now. Bitterness rises in her throat. What kind of family treats their own flesh and blood as a mere token in a political game? But our protagonist is prepared. She cites imperial law, noting that divorce requires mutual consent between husband and wife. She apologizes for any potential error, but her sharp mind knows there is no mistake. She has done her homework. Annoyance flares in the emperor's eyes. He interrupts, stating that the law she clings to is ancient history. It was established because divorce is a stain rarely seen in the imperial lineage. He pauses, letting the weight of his refusal hang in the air. Distressed by the conversation, the Emperor's gaze darkened. He demanded to know if she truly sought to sever their bond. To him, such a thought was unacceptable. A sudden divorce, it was a scandal he would never permit to stain his reign. His voice turned ice cold. He declared that the seat of the Empress was not a toy to be discarded. It was an eternal duty, not something she could simply walk away from. Isabelle's mind raced, analyzing his refusal. Finally, the truth clicked. The chains of this marriage were heavier than she thought. He was stalling, trying to bury the discussion. He tried to bargain with her. He claimed he could gift her the world jewels, treasures, anything she desired. He offered her a gilded cage live as she pleased, but the title of Empress would remain. The young woman anxiously fiddled with the fabric of her dress. Her voice trembled as she asked what he truly meant by that. The man leaned forward, his presence overwhelming. He asked if the Emperor of Castilia had the right to speak falsehoods. His word was law, and she was his Empress. A mocking smile tugged at her lips. She asked, with dangerous sweetness, if her power as Empress allowed her to do anything, except leave him. He nodded, unable to deny the trap he had set. Isabelle's smile deepened. It was a deal with the devil, but she would take it. She performed a flawless, elegant curtsy. She wished glory upon the sun that never sets the customary salute to the ruler. That was enough for now. But inside, fury boiled. How could she be satisfied with a single drop of wine when she wanted the whole vineyard? She turned her back, leaving the Emperor alone in the silence of his study. If he refused to grant her a divorce, she would force his hand. She would become a nightmare he couldn't ignore. It was time to accelerate her plans. But as she stepped into the corridor, a shadow emerged. Isabelle paused, long raven hair, innocent eyes. But that facade no longer fooled her. Standing there was Sasha, the Emperor's beloved concubine. Tension crackled in the air as the two women locked eyes. It seemed the girl intended to barge in on the Emperor without even an appointment. Don't let the delicate flower act fool you. Sasha was a treacherous snake slithering through the palace halls. Isabelle decided to treat her like air and kept walking, but Sasha called out, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, noting how long it had been since they last met. Our protagonist felt a headache coming on. She had zero patience for this empty chatter. To become a consort, one must master etiquette. Yet, this girl addressed the mother of the nation without a shred of courtesy. Disgraceful. Isabelle turned, her eyes sharp. She demanded to know what a mere consort was doing lurking in these hallways. Sasha smiled, unfazed. She chirped that she had gone to the Emperor's bedroom first. Since he wasn't in his bed, she came to his study. The redhead's eyes widened. The audacity to admit she barged into the Emperor's private bedchamber as if it were a public park. Our protagonist had heard enough. She cut the conversation short, stating she had important matters to attend to, and turned her heel. Wait, Sasha's voice rang out. Isabelle stopped, annoyance flaring. What could she possibly want now? Sasha clasped her hands, claiming there was something weighing on her heart that she needed to discuss. Our protagonist listened in disbelief. The girl suggested they should be close like sisters sharing secrets and worries. But the subtext was clear. She wanted to drop the act and speak honestly. Sasha's eyes narrowed slightly. She asked if Isabelle's behavior was just a tactical move, a game to capture the Emperor's attention. Silence stretched between them. When our protagonist first read the novel, she thought the consort was a foolish, innocent girl. She was wrong. Sasha saw her as a rival to be crushed. However, our clever protagonist couldn't help but smirk. She held all the aces. This entire confrontation was childish. Sasha was playing checkers, while Isabelle was playing 4D chess. The girl was too naive to predict Isabelle's next move. Sasha frowned, asking why she was laughing. Isabelle wiped a tear from her eye. She admitted it was hilarious seeing Sasha fight so desperately for nothing. Don't you agree? Isabelle taunted. The words struck Sasha like a physical blow. Fighting back angry tears, the girl demanded to know what she meant by struggling for nothing. Isabelle shrugged with the effortless grace. She told Sasha she could have him, all to herself. With the triumphant posture of a true queen, our protagonist declared she had absolutely no interest in the Emperor. Isabelle didn't care if they acted like soulmates or burned the kingdom down with their love. She just wanted to survive. And to survive, she would embrace the role of the villainess. Alexander had said she could do whatever she wished. So, she decided to drain the imperial treasury. She would shop until she dropped and live a life of absolute luxury. A wicked satisfaction settled in Isabelle's chest. Her plan was perfect. Return to her old, miserable life, never. As long as she was stuck in this story, she would enjoy every opulent second of it. The next morning, chaos erupted in the palace. Servants scrambled back and forth, hauling heavy crates. Maids rushed to organize precious items. Sasha stormed onto the scene, demanding answers. Visibly irritated, she asked Isabelle what on earth was happening. Our protagonist smiled sweetly. She announced she was moving. Her new palace was finally ready. Sasha's face twisted in confusion. She asked why the move was necessary and why, of all places, was she moving here. Isabelle let out a dark, satisfied laugh. This location was the first choice she made when she decided to become the villain, right next door to her enemy. She would claim her space within the consort palace, the very nest where Sasha was currently residing. Though Isabelle's original palace was grand and filled with exquisite furnishings, it paled in comparison to the gilded cage the Emperor had gifted his beloved Sasha. When the Emperor's favor turned cold, the servants followed suit, abandoning Isabelle to a life of isolation. Her residence fell into such disrepair that biting winds sliced through the cracks, chilling the very air she breathed. Powerless to mend the crumbling walls, Isabelle had been forced to endure the freezing drafts, eventually succumbing to a racking sickness. No matter how much Sasha feigned innocence, her palace was a treasure trove of opulence, overflowing with lavish items the Emperor had bought for her. And Isabelle couldn't predict when her freedom would come, or when she could finally sever her ties with the Emperor through divorce. Her strategy was clear: restore the Empress's palace to its former glory on her own terms. But until the dust settled, she refused to live in a construction zone. With the other royal residences far too distant, her eyes turned to the consort palace, spacious, luxurious, and ripe for the taking. Where was the harm in sharing? With a smirk, Isabelle offered a venomous suggestion. Perhaps Sasha would prefer the Empress's quarters for a change. She sold it as airy, with a minimalist charm. Surely, a humble girl like Sasha would adore such simplicity. Sasha stood frozen, rendered speechless by the audacity. Like a true villainess, Isabelle graciously added that Sasha was free to choose any other palace she pleased. The mask of innocence slipped. The girl snapped back fiercely, claiming the palace as her own domain. Why should she yield her territory to Isabelle? Seeing the young woman's composure crack brought a wave of deep satisfaction to our protagonist. Since Sasha refused to vacate, Isabelle delivered the final verdict: they would simply have to live together under one roof. The red-haired Empress smiled sweetly, hoping for a harmonious cohabitation. After all, what could possibly go wrong with such an arrangement? Behind her eyes, a storm brewed. It was obvious that the Empress's boldness had ignited a blazing fury within Sasha. Sasha clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. Feigning concern, she whimpered about how much the Empress must despise her. Then, donning her mask of fragility, she asked innocently if the Emperor would truly permit such a scandalous change. Isabelle remained unfazed. She let out a dry laugh, seeing right through Sasha's clumsy attempt to appear kind while plotting to tattle to her protector. With a piercing gaze, Isabelle challenged her. "Are you truly worried about me, Sasha?" Our protagonist found the girl's sudden concern laughable, and the irony of her words cut the consort deeper than any blade. Judging by the twisted expression on Sasha's face, Isabelle knew the girl would run straight to the Emperor's lap before the sun set. Later that afternoon, Isabelle sat in the tranquility of her chambers, sipping tea with elegant calm. Crash! The doors flew open as Alexander stormed in, radiating fury. Isabelle merely sighed. It was about time. He marched toward her, disbelief etched on his face. "Sasha told me the news," he growled. "Are you truly seizing the consort palace, huh?" The Emperor argued that she already possessed the Empress's residence. This power play against Sasha was completely unnecessary. Coolly, Isabelle reminded him of his own words: he had given her permission to do as she pleased. The reminder only fueled his rage. Our protagonist shrugged elegantly. She was merely obeying his imperial command to live her life freely. "I even offered her the Empress's palace," she added smoothly, "but the girl refused my generous hospitality." "Ridiculous," Alexander scoffed. He declared he could build her a sanctuary far grander and more sophisticated than Sasha's. Why must she covet what belonged to another? Isabelle let out a soft, weary sigh at his ignorance. She looked him in the eye and revealed the truth: she desired no other place. Only the consort palace would suffice. He stared at her, unsettled by her resolve. She pressed on. "Was it not you, your Majesty, who granted me this freedom?" Silence stretched between Alexander and Isabelle. His gaze was fierce, a tempest of authority and frustration. Yet, she did not flinch. Deep satisfaction swelled within her, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Defeated, Alexander finally exhaled. "Do as you wish," he muttered, lamenting that he never knew she could be as stubborn as a mule. Our protagonist beamed, though she knew the truth. He wasn't letting her go. He would endure her madness just to maintain the imperial facade. But perhaps this chaos could work in her favor. With a perfect mocking curtsy, she thanked him. "A wise decision, your Majesty." Alexander warned that sharing a palace would be a battlefield. He demanded she avoid any scandals that could tarnish the imperial name. Isabelle listened quietly as he muttered about finding a way to soothe Sasha's temper. A dangerous smile curved her lips. "I can promise nothing," she declared. "Peace depends entirely on your beloved consort's attitude." Isabelle knew better. After pushing boundaries this far, Sasha would never remain silent. A new day dawned. In the inner gardens, birds sang a cheerful melody as Isabelle strolled with her ladies, waiting for the storm to break. Calculations ran through the main character's mind. The silence within the palace walls was suffocating, far heavier than she had anticipated. It was too quiet. Even if her stay here was temporary, Isabelle had no intention of sitting idly by like a doll. She barked orders at the servants, "Move my boxes, fill every room immediately." Isabelle was determined to claim her territory. She flooded the palace with her belongings, invading every available corner. In the blink of an eye, she had seized over 70% of the consort's palace for herself. Yet, strangely, Sasha was nowhere to be found. Isabelle surmised the emperor must have done a thorough job soothing his precious dove. Even though the consort's palace was sprawling, fate seemed determined to make them cross paths. Isabelle noticed the pattern immediately. Instead of fighting back, Sasha turned a blind eye. The girl's expression was a mask of silent martyrdom, clearly playing the victim. It seemed the emperor had issued a gag order. Isabelle decided to stay in her lane. Meddling between those two was a recipe for disaster. Her grand strategy was simple: provoke Sasha into a rage. But the girl refused to take the bait, denying Isabelle the divorce she so desperately wanted. A chilling thought struck her. Was the emperor silently declaring that he would never let her go, no matter what chaos she caused? The situation was exhausting. In the original plot, Isabelle was nothing but fodder, a villainess designed solely to make Sasha look like an angel. Our protagonist knew the script. Soon, she would be discarded like yesterday's garbage. But she wasn't about to roll over and die. She refused to accept a tragic ending without a fight. If she wanted to escape this golden cage, she had to escalate. Isabelle needed to stop being annoying and start being absolutely terrible. She summoned her maids with a snap of her fingers. It's time for a fashion overhaul. Bring me every tailor in the empire. After all, unbridled extravagance is the hallmark of a true villainess. By afternoon, the palace was buzzing. An army of tailors and designers marched through the halls, carrying mountains of silk and velvet. Isabelle, draped in her robe, watched the spectacle like a queen. The empire's finest professionals had gathered at her feet. The rumors were already flying. One tailor whispered that the empress had burned and buried her entire old wardrobe. Another murmured that she had tossed her inferior garments to the maids like scraps. And so, the elite designers were here for one purpose: to build a legendary wardrobe from scratch, fit for a tyrant. One of the artisans stepped forward, trembling slightly. "Your Majesty, what do you think of this design?" He offered a sketchbook of exclusive patterns. "This model would perfectly complement your crimson hair," he suggested gently. "Please, take a look." Isabelle's eyes lit up. She realized instantly that first-rate designers were in a league of their own. The dresses were breathtakingly expensive and elegant. Our protagonist realized she had never touched such luxury in her entire existence. In her past life, she was a prisoner of poverty. Her parents had bled her dry, forcing her to fund her brother's education while she scraped by. The memory brought a wave of bone-deep exhaustion. Her parents had weaponized her guilt. They threw her success in her face, claiming her brother deserved the chances she had earned. She had reached her breaking point. In an explosion of emotion, she had finally snapped, "From now on, I live only for myself." Her parents had been paralyzed with shock. She was desperate to escape that living nightmare, Shavat, no matter the cost. Yet, guilt was a heavy chain. Even after leaving, she had sent money back home. Remembering it now, a pang of sorrow hit Isabelle. Because of her past scars, she felt a strange kinship with the character in the catalog. She flipped through the pages, lost in thought. But the reality was, she and Isabelle were worlds apart. Jane had struggled to buy cheap rags, while Isabelle was draped in diamonds and silk. Even inside the Empress's body, the urge to kneel and thank the heavens for such beauty was overwhelming. But she had to kill that impulse. If she showed a shred of humility, her cover would be blown. She had a role to play. The tailor watched her anxiously. "What do you think, Your Majesty? These are unique in all the Empire." Isabelle's reaction, however, sent a shockwave through the room. He expected praise for his taste. Instead, she steeled her heart. To escape this palace safely, she had to be a monster. She tossed the catalog aside with disdain. A malicious smile curled on her lips, radiating pure arrogance. She sneered, "Who else but you would dare create such hideous trash?" The tailor froze, speechless. Isabelle continued her assault. "If I walked the streets in these crude garments, the entire empire would laugh at me." She crossed her legs, looking down on him like an insect. "I hope you didn't come here just to insult me with these rags." The Empress scoffed. "Do you have anything actually expensive? Or is this it?" The man was paralyzed by her cruelty. Finally, Isabelle drove the dagger home. "Well, are you going to show me something worthy, or should I dismiss you? Exhaustion weighed heavily on the man as he confessed that he hadn't produced anything else yet. He dared to offer a presentation in 2 months, but the Empress cut him off, aggressively asking if she was expected to walk around in a single robe for 2 whole months. Fury ignited in her eyes. She ordered the tailor to stop lying if he valued his safety, for she had discovered that Sasha was scheduled to visit him the very next week. In this world, noble clothing was bespoke once a design was chosen. It became a singular creation, never to be sewn for another's soul. If there was one thing the aristocracy loathed, it was the humiliation of wearing garments that had already been seen on someone else. Therefore, uniqueness was absolute. Yet, everyone knew that among the Empire's elite, the young consort Sasha held a special status as a pampered client. The man stammered, trying to justify his negligence by claiming those specific designs were simply more compatible with the concubine Sasha's style. Isabelle saw right through the tailor's winding excuses. It was obvious those models hadn't been reserved yet. He was lying to her face. A dark realization hit her. Just how long had she allowed this disrespect to continue? "You are an arrogant man," she declared, her voice cold as ice, ordering him to bring the designs to her immediately. Terror finally flooded his face. With a dismissive wave of her hand, Isabelle remarked that he seemed incapable of grasping a simple truth. The Empress was infinitely superior to a mere consort. To demonstrate real power, her royal guard stepped forward, imposing and dangerous, desperate to save himself. The man squeaked that his assistants would fetch the portfolio instantly. Moments later, the catalog lay open before her. Isabelle scanned the potential outfits. He nervously asked which of the 14 designs she preferred. Her reply was calm but absolute. She wanted all of them. The tailor blinked, unable to process the command. "I hate repeating myself," she snapped, shoving the papers back into his trembling hands. Once again, she stated her demand clearly. She would take every single design in the collection. She was going to spend a fortune anyway. Why not buy every dress she could secretly sell them after the divorce and secure her own private funds? Far away from the boutique, in the gleaming halls of the Emperor's palace, a voice roared that this was sheer absurdity. A minister demanded to know if His Majesty understood the astronomical sum the Empress had just burned on dresses and jewelry. The council table buzzed with agitated whispers. One official sharply criticized her behavior, calling it a grotesque exaggeration. Even if it were to maintain appearances, this was madness. Her shopping spree had cost the equivalent of an entire day's defense budget for the Empire. Alexander sat at the head of the table, listening in silence. The elegant ruler seemed deeply annoyed by the cacophony of complaints. Another man spoke up, claiming he only wished to be honest as a loyal subject. Although Empress Isabelle of Castilla was excellent in her duties, Alexander could not let this slide. The Emperor began to tap his fingers on the table, a rhythmic warning. Yet another voice chimed in, arguing that such extravagant habits were beneath the seriousness of her royal title. Then, a malicious whisper cut through the air, claiming the consort Sasha was a fantastic candidate to replace the current Empress. Alexander's fingers drummed impatiently against the wood. Suddenly, he stopped and asked if they had finally purged all their thoughts. He commented dryly that he had been waiting for them to finish, but they sounded like wild horses that had no concept of when to stop running. The Emperor leaned back, reminding them of a verse from an ancient poem. It spoke of the splendor of Castilla, comparable to the legendary empire of Icarus, a glory that could never be bought, not even with all the gold filling Lake Nixos. Civilizations might fade into dust, but the empire would be eternal. One of the men paled, visibly tormented as he recognized the dangerous implication behind the poetic fragments. Alexander reminded them coldly that the empire possessed gold as boundless as Lake Nixos. Did they truly think a few dresses would dent the imperial treasury? "I am Alexander Lorenzi II, he declared. He was the empire incarnate, and the prestige of the nation was his own prestige. His gaze swept the room. "Which of you dares to question my authority here?" Shame washed over the men as the noble ruler asked if Isabelle's flawless competence had not earned her the right to a few dresses. He had gathered the most talented minds in the empire, yet apparently none of them were capable of discerning what was truly important. Alexander had chosen Isabelle as his empress. He turned his focus to the Minister of Finance, who shrank back nervously, asking if the man was questioning the emperor's decision. The man stammered, trying to respond, asking how someone like him could ever doubt the wisdom of His Majesty. He tried to backpedal, claiming he had expressed himself poorly and was merely worried about the empire's interests. Alexander scoffed impetuously. The minister clearly did not know his place, having remained in a position he did not deserve for far too long. The emperor decided right then to give him the position he truly deserved. Orders were barked instantly. The Minister of Finance was stripped of his post and sentenced to confinement in his mansion for 3 months. Screams for mercy echoed through the hall as the disgraced minister was dragged away by the guards. Suddenly, a realization strikes Alexander. There is a specific detail he nearly overlooked. The Empress's dignity is his own dignity. He will never permit her to wear rags when the Empire's coffers overflow with gold. The Minister of Defense blinks in confusion, but quickly scrambles to flatter the tyrant. He stammers that the Empress deserves nothing less than absolute opulence. Alexander lets out a cold laugh. He knew the coward would bend to his will. The Emperor casts his gaze around the room. Does everyone agree the Empress demands luxury? The answer is obvious. With a casual wave of his hand, he issues a command. Create a dress 10 times more extravagant than her last commission. The secretary bows, promising immediate execution. His point made. Alexander's eyes sharpen as he orders the council to resume their meeting. Later in the corridor, whispers circulate among the men regarding the brutal dismissal of Minister Earl Claxton. Alexander notes the efficiency of the purge. It happened faster than even he anticipated. He confides in his secretary. The minister was granted power far above his station for aiding the throne, yet he latched on like a greedy leech, demanding endless privileges. The emperor had already weighed the possibilities. He planned to purge the pest eventually, but fate provided the perfect excuse to strike now. The secretary offers a word of caution. Punishing him as a noble could invite severe backlash from the aristocracy. Alexander scoffs at the concern. People never know their place, and human greed is a bottomless pit. Silence hangs in the air for a moment. Alexander demands the true meaning behind the silence. The secretary hesitates, then warns that the common folk may struggle to accept this. No matter his achievements, they will not see him as a wise ruler if he continues these ruthless, controversial judgments. In response, the emperor offers a chilling smile. The secretary still fails to grasp one crucial detail. Alexander's reign is young. He is not maintaining peace. He is still in the violent phase of expanding imperial power. Therefore, benevolence is useless. Alexander is determined to rule through absolute fear. He reveals his true path. He will crush anomalies, rule with an iron fist, and dispose of obstacles without a shred of mercy. This is his strategy. These are the only cold lessons he ever learned from his father. Turning to leave, he drops a final, heavy question. Would he have slaughtered his own father if he cared about being called a wise emperor? The secretary stands frozen, unable to answer. He remembers it vividly. It has been 3 years since Alexander killed the previous emperor to seize the throne. That bloody ascension pacified the border conflicts. It crushed the northern barbarians and strengthened the empire. Yet critics still dismiss them as young and reckless, preferring mental games over brute strength. But Alexander is not a man who hides in the shadows or yields to pressure. He will trample his rivals just for satisfaction. The secretary realizes the truth. The extravagant dress for the empress is not a gift, but a warning. He walks on, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. His workload is destined to increase day after day. He wonders what the empress will think of this power play. He only prays she doesn't take offense. Meanwhile, a new day dawns over the palace. Servants march in, carrying massive boxes. Isabelle stands amidst the sea of gifts, holding a dress, her eyes wide with shock. Our protagonist is utterly mesmerized by the sheer volume of presents. Isabelle runs her fingers over the precious gems embedded in the fabric. The golden threads shimmer with a quality she has never seen in her entire life. She gasps. Despite the countless layers of rich fabric, the garment remains as light as a feather. The butler announces it is a gift from Alexander. She expected luxury, but this is a masterpiece beyond imagination. The servant explains with reverence. This was commissioned with the emperor's deep affection. Its cost alone rivals the value of an entire palace. Isabelle's jaw drops. The price tag is terrifying. If she dares spill a single drop of sweat on this, she will never forgive herself. Trembling, she asks when Alexander decided to send this. In response, the butler presents a letter, handwritten by the emperor himself. She reads the elegant script. He questions if the dress can match her beautiful eyes, but requests she wear it for their next meeting. Confusion swirls in her mind. She stares at the paper, desperately trying to decipher his true intentions. She recalls clearly that Alexander never cared for her before. Has something changed, or is this a game? A maid breaks the silence, gushing over the dress. It is a design that transcends anything seen in the empire. She bows low, congratulating the empress on receiving such a splendid treasure. But then, she oversteps. She babbles on about how the empress's sincere heart must have finally melted the emperor's frozen soul. Isabelle stands speechless at the bold claim. Immediately, a senior maid scolds the girl for her loose tongue and inappropriate words. The young maid hurriedly apologized for the intrusion, trembling slightly, but Isabelle simply assured her it was fine. She realized these girls were beaming with joy, as if this fairy tale moment belonged to them. Truthfully, Isabelle held no hatred toward this girl, not a single drop. Memories flooded back. This young woman had remained fiercely loyal to her throughout their entire miserable time in the palace. In fact, the empress had been quite fond of her. However, Regarding the other maids, Isabelle remained unsure of their true intentions. She figured the truth would reveal itself in due time. Our protagonist decided to shift her focus to something far more critical. Specifically, the astronomical price tag of that dress. According to the Emperor himself, that single blue gown held the value of an entire palace. In her previous life, she had been a shopaholic, but the spending standards of an emperor were on a different dimension. Isabelle realized she would need to put in serious effort just to match this level of luxury. It seemed he rarely showed off his wealth, simply because his coffers were too deep to measure? Or perhaps, was this sudden generosity sparked by the divorce request? Did the idea of separating from her truly bother him that much? One of the maids stepped forward, eyes sparkling. She suggested Isabelle try on the gown immediately and offered to assist with the fitting, but Isabelle hesitated. She had no desire to wear such a heavy burden so soon. She turned on her heel. With a triumphant air, she declared she could not accept such a grand gift from a man she intended to leave. She ordered them to toss the dress into the wardrobe. Music filled the air as a conductor led the orchestra. The hall buzzed with the cheerful chatter of elegant guests. A magnificent dinner was laid out on the tables, and then the doors opened. Wearing splendid shoes and a breathtaking dress, Isabelle made her entrance. Her crimson hair was swept up in an elegant bun, highlighting her fascinating, jewel-like green eyes. This extravagant party was a weekly tradition, held every Friday. All members of the royal family and their servants were expected to attend. Though this tradition dated back to the third king, one had to wonder, how could they afford a celebration of this magnitude every single week? It was likely just a way to flex their absurd wealth. Regardless of the cost, Isabelle had planned every detail to perfection. The event was refined, utilizing resources efficiently without tarnishing the dignity of the imperial family. Isabelle felt a surge of satisfaction as she watched the event unfold. It was a vision of elegance that few would be capable of imagining, let alone executing. She stood there, delicately swirling the wine in her glass, when someone approached to praise the party. She didn't need to look to know who it was. It was Count Barclay. He looked at her with a strange, calculating gaze and a malicious smile. He was a minor villain who had been lurking since the story's beginning. This man was an active supporter of Sasha, the rival who desperately wanted to steal the title of Empress. Isabelle thought to herself, good heavens, what an ugly mustache. The Count was so startled by her cold attitude that his words died in his throat. He stammered, asking what the problem was. Isabelle simply smiled, telling him it was high time to drop the hypocrisy. She asked if he enjoyed her honesty. The man blinked, completely unable to comprehend the shift in her personality. Recovering, he claimed he was only trying to sincerely praise her hard work in organizing such a splendid event. Isabelle's eyes narrowed. Challengingly, she asked if his gratitude had taken 3 years to finally appear. What a shock. Count Barclay stood frozen, stunned by her audacity. She turned to leave him behind. If he were truly grateful, he would have spoken up years ago. It was pathetic that he was trying to cling to her power only now. The fragile woman who used to beg for those false compliments, she no longer existed. As for the former Isabelle, well, our protagonist decided now was not the time to mourn the ghosts of the past. Walking through the shimmering golden hall, Isabelle began to calculate her next move. But then she saw him. Alexander was there. The Emperor stood tall, clad in a dazzling, ornate imperial outfit. Isabelle noticed his arrival instantly. Truly, he was the most handsome man in the room. He was the kind of visual masterpiece that appeared only once every 100 years. Reading it in the original novel felt cheesy, but seeing him in person, it was the undeniable truth. Isabelle felt a flicker of surprise. She hadn't expected to see him here. Across the hall, the Empress locked eyes with the man, and he stared right back. Alexander looked at her in silence, and for a moment, her mind went blank. Suddenly, a figure approached, shattering the tension between them. Long black hair fluttered in the air. Sasha, dressed in a long, ornate cream-colored gown, called out the Emperor's name casually. A ripple of shock went through the guests. How dared a mere consort call the Emperor by his name, completely ignoring his royal title? The secretary immediately reprimanded her, but the girl just widened her eyes, explaining that her happiness had simply spilled over naturally. Alexander looked down at her with a cold indifference, unfazed. Sasha grabbed his arm, whining that she had missed him terribly. Watching this display, Isabelle thought the whole act was far too dramatic for a public space. Yet, the other guests turned a blind eye, still viewing Sasha as a heroine despite her lack of manners. Sasha blinked, perfecting her innocent, doe-eyed look. But Isabelle noticed something. As the Emperor and his consort began to walk away, the girl whispered to him. She claimed that even if they saw each other daily, she would still miss him. Sasha seized the moment, declaring that she had spent ages waiting for this party, simply for the chance to be by the Emperor's side. Alexander dismisses the event with a rude sneer, complaining that this boring gathering happens every single week. So, Why the high expectations? Isabelle listens, surprised, as Sasha chirps that every week is exciting simply because the entire Imperial family is together. Isabelle raises an eyebrow. What exactly did she mean by calling them family? The Emperor sharply warns her to watch her words. She quickly bows her head, apologizing for speaking without thinking. Isabelle wonders internally what kind of shallow provocation was that. How could the original Isabelle have been so deeply hurt by something so weak? Sasha just looks around the room, projecting her usual aura of wide-eyed, fragile innocence. But our protagonist feels nothing. Whether those two truly love each other is irrelevant. She isn't the real Isabelle, so the heartbreak cannot touch her. It would be a waste to react to such basic tricks. Besides, she has a far more important purpose for attending this party. Isabelle delicately swirls the crimson wine in her glass. Standing before her is Mary's Wilhelm, who looks like a frightened rabbit. Splash. The wine goes flying. Isabelle drenches the Marquis, catching him completely off guard. The guests gasp in horror, watching the scene unfold, but the woman just offers a satisfied, smug smile. She apologizes coolly, claiming her hands were just, so very slippery. Crimson wine splashed violently, creating a shocking stain that froze the room. A deathly silence fell over the banquet as the guests stared in absolute disbelief. Even Sasha trembled like a frightened bird, retreating to hide behind the Emperor's protection. Isabelle merely looked at the Marquis and shrugged, claiming she hadn't realized just how slippery her hand was. The tormented nobleman was shaking with rage. He pointed a trembling finger, accusing her of deliberately humiliating him and spilling the drink with malicious intent. Isabelle let out a bored sigh, reminding him that she had already apologized and asking what more he demanded. She insisted it was a mere slip, though her eyes held no regret, leaving him completely unconvinced. Her gaze turned icy as she warned him that accidents happen twice. Suddenly, her palm cut through the air, delivering a thunderous slap to the Marquis that made him feel the true, crushing force of her hand. Isabelle glared at him, pure loathing burning in her chest. How dare this married father touch one of her girls? The sheer audacity made her blood boil. Flashback to a few nights prior. A memory surfaced in our protagonist's mind. She recalled the hushed whispers of the maids, catching only fragments of their shadowed conversation. She quietly drew closer, stepping softly to uncover the source of the commotion. Curiosity pulled her in, urging her to understand exactly what was unfolding. A maid was frantically comforting her sobbing friend, whose tears flowed from fear. The distraught girl confessed that a man's obsession had escalated. He was flooding her with relentless letters and had even dared to stalk her at her own home. The young woman was paralyzed by terror, dreading that Marquis Wilhelm might be lying in wait as she left for work. Isabelle froze the moment she heard that name. She recognized him immediately. Whispers floated through the air like poison. The maids trembled as they spoke of dark rumors that the Marquis had a depraved appetite for touching young girls. Another voice chimed in, shivering with disgust. It was said he had married off his own daughter to a destitute family, discarding her like trash just to be rid of her. Terror gripped one of the maids. How could she refuse a man of such immense power? Isabelle listened from the shadows as the girl's voice cracked. She was ready to resign, even flee her home, just to avoid his predatory grasp. A cold fury ignited within our protagonist. That wretch was old enough to be the girl's grandfather. Isabelle felt her blood boil at his sheer audacity. Injustice against anyone was vile, but targeting a girl who had served her with such loyalty, that was unforgivable. She lifted her chin, inhaling sharply to steady her raging heart. She silently vowed that the young woman would shed no more tears. Our protagonist was ready for war. Back in the present, Isabelle's hand moved like a viper strike. Smack. Her palm connected with the Marquis's face once more, the sound echoing through the hall. The guests froze in terror, wondering if anyone dared to intervene. Sasha stood bewildered, unable to process the chaos. Meanwhile, whispers turned to scolding within the glittering golden hall as the nobility began to murmur against their empress. But Isabelle turned a deaf ear to their judgment. She raised her hand again to her. This wasn't just violence, it was the swiftest form of justice she could deliver. Despite the outcry, fear paralyzed the crowd. No one dared to stop her rampage except for one man. Sasha watched with bated breath as Alexander stepped into the fray. The Emperor's voice boomed like thunder, shouting her name. A satisfied smirk curled Isabelle's lips. She had provoked exactly the reaction she wanted. But she wasn't done yet. There was still one final touch. With the grace of a tyrant, the Empress unleashed a devastating kick right between the Marquis's legs. Gasps filled the room as the situation escalated to madness. The Marquis finally tasted the agony of his sins. The man collapsed to the floor, foaming at the mouth and knocked cold by the blow. Isabelle looked down at him, her eyes filled with absolute contempt. In her mind, this was necessary. One had to use whatever tools were available to crush a cockroach. She spun around at the sound of Alexander's voice. For a split second, a flicker of fear pricked her heart seeing him so close. Alexander stood there, his expression severe and carved from ice. She fell silent, waiting for the Emperor's judgment. Straightening her spine, she adopted a defiant stance. "Is there a problem?" she challenged. The Emperor's aura was dark and oppressive, livid that she had turned his banquet into a battlefield. Before she could retreat, Alexander seized her arm in a vice-like grip. Isabelle opened her mouth to speak. She resolved to become the villainess in this story. By causing a public scandal, she would force his hand into divorce, sparing him any future shame. It felt utterly bizarre to extend a hand of mercy to someone like Sasha, yet she found herself moving before she could stop it. She resolved to follow the frantic beating of her own heart, knowing all too well that Alexander would likely silence her existence soon enough. His eyes burned with a terrifying fury as he declared that she had caused a catastrophic mess. Isabelle froze in confusion. Had the tyrant finally lost his mind? Even with that thunderous temper, Alexander remained devastatingly handsome. She struggled to decipher what twisted game he was playing now. The Emperor released a heavy sigh, leaving her bewildered as he muttered that such reckless behavior was completely unacceptable. Alexander's gaze locked onto her hand, which was bright red from delivering a barrage of slaps to the Marquise. Ignoring everyone else, he commanded the royal physician to attend to the Empress immediately. Was she hallucinating? Or was she the only one completely baffled by this sudden shift in the wind? Apparently not. She stepped closer to Alexander, her voice dripping with irony, and pointed out that Marcus Wilhelm, currently unconscious on the floor, might need the doctor more than she did. The Emperor simply shrugged, telling her to do as she pleased, effectively dismissing the fallen man's existence. Moments later, secluded in a quiet corner away from the prying eyes of guests, the royal physician tended to Isabelle while she grappled with the realization that Alexander was actually protecting her. After a careful inspection, the doctor assured them that no bones were broken. Her hand was merely inflamed from the impact of her own strength. Isabelle's mind raced, fixating on the impossible fact that the Emperor had not scolded her a single time in front of the court. The Emperor commanded the physician to use only the finest treatments available. Isabelle narrowed her eyes, trying to uncover the hidden motive behind his excessive care. He had seemed furious just moments ago, yet now he offered her a smile so affectionate it was dangerous. She quickly looked away, refusing to let her heart flutter for this man. Her mind spun in circles, wondering what that tender expression truly meant. Across the palace, whispers spread like wildfire. Guests murmured about the golden atmosphere, questioning why the Emperor, who usually doted on the consort, was suddenly focused on his wife. What could have triggered such a seismic shift in the imperial dynamic? The Empress knew exactly how she looked, a hateful villainess in the eyes of the public, and the dramatic reaction only fueled the fire. Alexander announced they would proceed to the imperial dinner once she was treated. He turned to her, delivering a charming wink that could stop a heart. Isabelle felt dizzy with confusion at his erratic behavior, but allowed him to escort her toward the magnificent great golden hall. With effortless grace, he removed his heavy coat and draped it over Isabelle's shoulders, claiming her with a protective, possessive weight. Isabelle couldn't help but appreciate the warmth, though she kept her expression guarded as she scanned the faces of the lingering crowd. In the background, cast in shadow, Sasha looked utterly desolate. The beloved consort was clearly struggling to maintain her composure. Our protagonist noted the devastating blow to Sasha's ego, while also catching the ongoing gossip circulating among the nobility. She could already see the headlines. Tomorrow's newspapers would be obsessed with this shocking display of unity between the Emperor and Empress. Was this his strategy, pretending to care for her to silence the scandalous rumors about their impending divorce? Alexander addressed to the gathered nobles, claiming with false modesty that he hadn't prepared anything formal, merely hoping they would enjoy the evening. He declared this a time for casual exchange between the palaces, not official business, wishing for everyone to relax without pressure. Isabelle nearly rolled her eyes. To call this lavish display unprepared was the height of imperial arrogance. If this extravagance was a casual Friday, what on earth did an annual gala look like? Even the simple appetizers were masterpieces of culinary art. She sighed deeply, deciding she must eat. After all, a villainess needs energy to execute her wicked schemes. Alexander leaned in, urging the Empress to serve herself first, teasing that she had expended quite a bit of stamina slapping people earlier. She let out a dry, awkward laugh. Suddenly, Sasha's voice cut through the air, complimenting Isabelle's gown. Feigning innocence, the girl asked if the dress was from the Charlotte Collins boutique, loudly mentioning rumors that the Empress had purchased 14 designs at once. Naturally, the designs were fabulous, and Sasha admitted they suited Isabelle's grand stature perfectly. But for herself, Sasha claimed a simpler style was sufficient. Our protagonist scrutinized this humble act, realizing it was a weaponized form of modesty. It clicked instantly. In the original story, Sasha was the underdog heroine who rose from poverty to power. Isabelle recalled a specific episode involving a noble lady and a mink stole where Sasha had used this exact tactic. Playing the part of the frugal saint, Sasha declared she could never buy such expensive things, insisting she would be content with humble squirrel or rabbit fur. In the original plot, that statement had humiliated the wealthy noble lady, painting her as wasteful and cruel, and just as expected. The men in the room gazed at Sasha with renewed admiration. Isabelle realized this wasn't accidental, it was a calculated strike. But had the consort forgotten her earlier slip-up, bragging about her close friendship with that very same boutique owner? Speaking of dresses, Alexander suddenly tore his attention away from Sasha's performance and turned his cold gaze back to Isabelle. With a sharp edge to his voice, he asked the Empress why she wasn't wearing the dress he had personally gifted her. Was his offering not good enough? Throughout dinner, Isabelle's mind was in turmoil. Why was he speaking to her with such intensity? She steeled her heart, refusing to be drawn into his dangerous orbit. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken tension. The guests shifted uneasily, sensing the cold war between the Emperor and his Empress. Isabelle steels her heart, realizing that the storm of public opinion will rage, no matter which path she chooses. Shifting her strategy, she strikes directly at his pride. She tells him that his majestic nobility clashes with such simple garments. With a cold gaze, she declares that she would rather be gifted an entire city or a grand castle. A gasp ripples through the hall. The guests are thunderstruck by her audacity. Isabelle lets out a quiet sigh. Since he is the Emperor of the world, surely this is pocket change. But deep down, she feels her plans slipping away. Yet, Alexander simply smiles at her. His eyes lock onto hers as he asks if a mere city is truly all she desires. He captures her hand in his warm grip, whispering that such a small gift would never be enough. Gazing at her with an intensity that burns, Alexander vows that even if he conquered a neighboring empire to lay at her feet, she could never be replaced. He reminds her with absolute conviction that she is the pillar of his empire and his one and true empress. Isabelle freezes, shaken to her very core. Had the man eaten something rotten? Her master plan was to secure a hefty alimony and a quick divorce, not to drain the imperial treasury. It makes zero sense for him to continue showering her with such extravagance. Panic rises in her chest as she wonders what on earth she would do if he actually presented her with a dress worth the price of a kingdom. Suddenly, a soft voice cuts through the tension. Sasha interrupts, playing the humble consort perfectly. She claims she needs no expensive gowns, stating that simple silk and linen are enough for her. The two nobles nearby lean in, listening intently as the consort preaches that a person's true worth does not shift like the fabric of their clothes. She looks at the Emperor with wide eyes, saying her only condition is to remain by his side for a lifetime. That, she claims, would be more than enough. The guests murmur in admiration as the young woman declares that even without jewels, he treats her like a precious treasure. Isabelle is left standing there, completely speechless. To our protagonist, this entire display feels jarring and calculated. She eyes Sasha, realizing the young woman is far more intelligent than she appears. Had the consort felt a spike of insecurity upon seeing Alexander focus his attention solely on Isabelle? Alexander's expression turns ice cold as he rudely asks Sasha what she is talking about, ruthlessly putting the consort in her place. The Emperor states flatly that she has no treasure. The air in the room freezes. He tells the girl that he has merely granted her an allowance appropriate for her position as an imperial consort. Nothing more and nothing less. Sasha trembles, visibly devastated by his blunt and unyielding response. He presses on, asking how she expects to fulfill her duties to the people if she does not even understand the resources she possesses. To him, false modesty is no virtue for the imperial family. Isabelle watches in stunned silence as the argument unfolds. Sasha looks as though her world has shattered under the Emperor's speech. He demands to know if she understands his meaning. Voice weak. The young woman replies that she will remember this lesson in the future. Isabelle suppresses a sigh, knowing that despite this harsh reprimand, Sasha will likely return to her old ways before long. But a thought gnaws at her in the original book. Would Alexander ever have spoken to the heroine like that? Her memories hold no trace of this cold rationality. The dinner atmosphere grows heavy, and she realizes she is not the only one surprised. The guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. Isabelle feels her grip on the future slipping. She no longer knows what to expect. She remembers with crystal clarity that the character of the Empress was supposed to be cruelly abandoned by the Emperor and his lover. Finally, the protagonist decides to ignore the drama and eat. To Alexander, Sasha's humble act must have seemed like a ridiculous exaggeration. She finds herself analyzing the situation, watching him discuss the heavy obligations of nobility. She had always seen him as just another authoritarian tyrant. Breaking the tension, Alexander asked the table if anyone would care to join him for a drink. As several guests eagerly offer to share a glass of wine, Isabelle realizes he is capable of effortlessly resetting the atmosphere of the dinner. But a mischievous gleam returns to her eyes. She is determined not to lose this battle. She decides to become the nightmare guest, behaving so poorly that they will be forced to tire of her. Isabelle begins to complain loudly, ordering the servants to remove every single fishbone. She does not stop there, demanding her steaks be grilled to perfection and that the tomatoes must be peeled before serving, claiming her delicate stomach cannot possibly digest tomato skin. Whispers ripple through the hall as guests comment on the Empress's difficult temperament, recalling how she used to be gentle and calm. She hears the men gossiping, wondering how the once benevolent and merciful Isabelle could have undergone such a drastic and unpleasant change. The same voices praise the imperial consort, noting that besides being sweet, she remains completely submissive to the emperor's will. Isabelle feels a flash of annoyance at these foolish comments comparing her to Sasha, but she decides to focus on the one good thing: the food is delicious. The Empress knows she must remain 100% committed to her role as the villain. Across the table, Alexander silently takes a sip of his drink. Suddenly, something catches the Emperor's sharp attention. What could it be? After the party, time flows by quietly until Isabelle receives a mysterious envelope. She glances at the sender. It is a letter from Duchess Salinger. This is the first time Isabelle has ever heard that name. It never appeared in the pages of the original book. Why would this stranger send her an invitation? There are no records of the Duchess in Isabelle's papers, so they are certainly not relatives. Could she be a friend? Or perhaps a mysterious ally waiting in the shadows? In the original novel, Isabelle was nothing but a side character. It wouldn't be shocking if she had zero allies in this snake pit. Yet, if Duchess Salinger was truly her friend, refusing the invitation would raise flags. But Isabelle's personality had done a complete 180 recently. Ignoring an ally could paint her as unstable, and in this cutthroat empire, the insane didn't survive. They burned at the stake. Her mission was simple: secure a divorce and leave. Ending up on a witch trial pyre was not part of the plan. Caution became her armor. Still, our protagonist needed to know why this sudden invitation. Staying cooped up was useless. She decided to venture out for a walk. Even if she planned to leave, she was stuck here for now, and in a palace full of enemies, information was ammunition. She needed secrets, the kind you couldn't find in dusty library books or through gossiping maids. Isabelle realized the high society tea party was the perfect hunting ground for intel. But stepping into the lion's den required grace. At the Salinger Palace, the garden was blooming with elegant ladies in ball gowns. Young noblewomen paraded like peacocks, whispering the latest scandals behind silk fans. At the center of it all, Duchess Salinger turned to greet the afternoon's guest of honor, Empress Isabelle of Castilia. Aside from her designers, this was the first time our protagonist faced the nobility head-on. Judging by her title and commanding aura, the Duchess was the alpha here. Isabelle knew she had to tread lightly. Was Salinger a friend or a foe? While she analyzed the threat, whispers of praise for her gown floated through the air. They marveled at how the deep wine crimson perfectly complemented her fiery hair and porcelain skin. But our protagonist was distracted, counting the empty seats. Suddenly, a sharp laugh cut through her thoughts. Duchess Salinger leaned in, her smile failing to reach her eyes. "Your dress is truly luxurious, Your Majesty." The mask was slipping. The vibe was unmistakable. This woman was definitely not an ally. In high society, discussing wealth was the height of vulgarity. To speak of money at a grand party was the ultimate taboo. Asking about prices or costs was beneath true nobility. It was simply classless. So, calling the dress luxurious wasn't a compliment. It was a calculated insult, branding her as a flashy upstart. With a sneering laugh, the Duchess emphasized that only the dress had value. Isabelle felt a spark of indignation. How could a seasoned noblewoman display such trashy etiquette? Sure, this empire worshipped power, and Isabelle came from a fallen family. But she was still the Empress. Where was the basic respect? It was clear. The Duchess saw her as nothing more than a peasant in a crown, unfit for their sparkling world. But she had messed with the wrong woman. The old Isabelle was gone. Snapping her fan open, Isabelle refused to swallow the insult. "Oh, this." She smiled sweetly. "It's a custom piece from Boutique Winston." She smoothed the fabric, her voice dripping with innocence. "They have so many fabulous designs available. I simply had to choose." Then her eyes sharpened. "I believe I saw you purchasing quite a few luxurious items there yourself, Duchess." The older woman flushed and bolted upright, fleeing the conversation. And Isabelle? She hid a triumphant smirk behind her fan. The Duchess had just choked on her own poison. Isabelle had spotted the label immediately. By calling out their shared tailor, she proved the Duchess was just as vulgar as she was. Rule number 1, don't start a war you can't finish. But the game wasn't over. 2 seats remained empty, one for Isabelle. But who was the other for then? She arrived. The atmosphere shifted as the guests bowed to the imperial consort. Sasha floated in, wearing a delicate cream dress embroidered with false innocence. She gestured for the ladies to sit. Isabelle's mind raced. Sasha's presence here complicated everything. Wearing a smug smile, Sasha glided toward the Empress. "What a delight to see you here, Your Majesty," she lied. The girl beamed with a friendly expression, but Isabelle saw the trap. The entire party was a setup to humiliate her. Imperial etiquette was clear: when a superior is seated, they remain seated. You never stand for a late arrival. It was a rule designed to protect the hierarchy, ensuring the Empress never looked beneath anyone. Yet, Isabelle realized every single woman in the garden had stood up for Sasha, intentionally ignoring the rules. Sasha approached gracefully, her doe-eyed innocence so perfect it was infuriating. Across the silent hall, the consort locked eyes with the Empress. Isabelle stared back, cold and unyielding. The real battle had begun. The banquet hall buzzed with whispers as guests fawned over the consort, praising the delicate elegance of her cream-colored gown. At last, the truth clicks into place for Isabelle. She finally understands the real reason Duchess Salinger invited her to this snake pit. It was undoubtedly a trap set by Sasha. That little schemer orchestrated this entire event to make herself the center of attention and humiliate the Empress in public. However, the shrewd protagonist realizes the game is rigged. It is time to flip the board. A cold, satisfied smile plays on Isabelle's lips. Suddenly, with a violent sweep of her arm, she sends the entire tea service crashing to the floor. The guests gasp in horror as porcelain shatters everywhere. Sasha freezes, the color draining from her face as she recalls the other tragedies she has witnessed. Isabelle stands amidst the wreckage, her hand still outstretched. The Empress looks down at the other women like a goddess of war, imposing and terrifying. Her voice cuts through the silence. She remarks that the laws of etiquette seem to be upside down in this mansion. If the seating arrangement disrespects her rank, then the table deserves to be cleared. Panic erupts among the noble women. They scramble to apologize to the Empress, desperate to fix the disaster they allowed to happen. Isabelle ignores them and turns her sharp gaze to the mastermind. She calls out to Sasha, asking if the consort has any words for her now. Trembling with nerves, Sasha begins her performance. The girl stammers, begging Isabelle for forgiveness and claiming she is new to the Empire's customs. Tears well up in her eyes as she explains she was not used to the strict rules of etiquette. She promises to be more careful next time, playing the victim perfectly. Isabelle lets out a heavy, irritated sigh. Sasha always hides behind these pathetic excuses, and frankly, it is becoming exhausting to constantly educate her. Our protagonist pauses, her mind racing for a moment. She notices that Sasha is already shaking like a leaf. The concubine probably never imagined she would have to bow her head to the woman she once despised. Isabelle declares that since the tea is spilled, she has no reason to stay. The elegant monarch turns on her heel to leave, but before she exits completely, she pauses to deliver one final strike. Her voice drops to a chilling whisper. She warns Sasha that from now on, she better watch her behavior when standing in the presence of the Empress. Those words hit the room like a physical blow, leaving the girls in shock. Sasha remains dead silent, humiliated by the public reprimand. Sometime later, the scene shifts to the Emperor's office. Sasha pours her heart out to Alexander, recounting every detail of the incident. He listens to her sob story without emotion, coldly. He replies that she needs to handle these petty squabbles on her own. The girl blinks, seemingly unable to comprehend his lack of sympathy. Alexander sighs, his patience wearing thin. He explains that, as the Emperor, he is not idle enough to intervene in the mess of a simple tea party. His eyes bore into her with intensity. Immediately switching tactics, Sasha plays the innocent card. She asks if she's bothering him, claiming she was only afraid of disappointing him by failing to adapt to the Empire. She widens her eyes, insisting she only wanted to keep him informed. Putting on a charming mask, he assures her he is not bothered at all, but Sasha pushes, noting that the Emperor seems too busy to listen to her woes. Internally, Alexander wonders why she's wasting his time with this useless story. His fingers tap rhythmically against the table, a sign of his rising anxiety. Cutting to the chase, the Emperor asks what she actually wants him to do. Sasha ponders for a moment, and then a sly smile touches her lips. The consort speaks softly, hoping she's not crossing a line. She claims that after the party, she heard the guests insulting the Empress's reputation. She acts as though Isabelle's behavior that afternoon was shocking, even to her. Alexander asks what that has to do with him. Sasha explains that Isabelle is too proud to listen to a mere consort like herself. So, the girl suggests a solution. She wants him to express these concerns to Isabelle directly. After all, he is still her husband. Is he not? The sound of his fingers tapping on the table fills the silence. Sasha is certain the Empress would listen to him. Later that night, the cold moonlight bathes the palace in silver. Alexander walks down the dark corridor, lost in thought about Sasha's request. Slowly, a malicious smile twists his features. The girl has not surpassed his expectations. In truth, the consort is not as naive as she pretends to be. She knows exactly how to play the game. Although she took the long way around, she eventually revealed her true colors. What Sasha truly wants is for him to crush Isabelle and reprimand her for her behavior. But honestly, there are no innocents in this filthy world. That woman is actually very similar to him. Sasha is truly cruel, hiding a rotten soul behind a facade of kindness and beauty. She thinks only of herself. He would have actually hated her if she were truly naive and kind. Alexander does not mind having a snake by his side. That is exactly why he made her his consort. It is all a calculation of gains and losses. However, her act has become irritating recently. He notices her demands are growing, and her greed is starting to test his patience. He stops before a grand door and knocks, knowing exactly what awaits him inside. Isabelle swings the door open to find Alexander waiting. The Empress looks furious. She demands to know if there is an urgent reason for disturbing her at this ungodly hour. However, he remains silent for a beat. Then, flashing a dangerous smile, he simply asks if he may come in. Isabelle offers no reply. After a cold assessment of the situation, she steps aside, allowing the Emperor to enter her sanctuary. Alexander pauses, a realization striking him. It had been an eternity since he last set foot in Isabelle's chambers. Over a month had passed since his last visit, yet he recalls his wife's stinging accusation that he had neglected her for 2 weeks. So, what possessed the ruler of the empire to disturb her peace at the stroke of midnight? A charming smile plays on his lips as he asks, "Do a husband and wife truly need a special reason to meet?" Isabelle's irritation only spikes. He was using her own words against her. She had already demanded a divorce. Was this his way of mocking her resolve? The Emperor studied his wife's annoyed features. It was fascinating. Her expressions had become so much more vivid. In the past, she was a portrait of anxiety or sorrow, but this woman standing before him, this Isabelle, was entirely different. At first, he dismissed her behavior as a desperate ploy for attention. But the longer he watched her, the more he realized he was wrong. Something fundamental had shifted. He thought, a flicker of intrigue moving his hand. She had transformed into a completely new woman. Her taste in luxury had exploded. But strangely, he found he preferred this version of her. For the longest time, Isabelle had merely copied Sasha, wearing identical dresses, sparking rumors that the Emperor was too cheap to clothe his own wife. Amused by the memory, Alexander confessed he never knew she was capable of making such a face. Despite 3 years of marriage, he was genuinely surprised to be discovering new layers to her character. Isabelle challenged him immediately. "Is that true?" she asked. He simply replied that this bold new personality suited her perfectly. The Empress paused, processing the sudden praise falling from her husband's lips. She crosses her arms, defensive walls going up. She had assumed he came at midnight to discuss matters of state, not to flirt. Trying to decode his motive, Isabelle accepts the compliment cautiously, replying that she is quite fond of her new self as well. Cutting the pleasantries short, she declares that if he has no urgent business, he should return to his own palace and let her sleep. Alexander's smile turns mischievous. Before turning to leave, he drops one last comment. Her new style pleases him greatly. A flash of anxiety hits her. She spins around, voice tight, asking if there has been some sort of misunderstanding. She wasn't dressing up for his benefit. The Emperor sighs, admitting he knows that all too well. She is the one asking for a divorce, after all. He clarifies his meaning. He simply appreciates that she finally knows how to adorn herself beautifully. Isabelle is left stunned by the raw sincerity in his voice. Why did her heart betray her by skipping a beat? She stammers a thank you. Alexander beams at her, teasingly asking why her cheeks have turned such a lovely shade of crimson. Perhaps our protagonist simply wasn't used to receiving genuine praise from such a devastatingly handsome man. She quickly deflects, claiming the room's lighting is to blame. "It is not my face blushing," she insists. "It is merely the lamplight." Alexander just smiles, seeing right through her. He realizes this small interaction means more to her than she admits. Watching her flustered reaction, the Emperor decides this situation is far more entertaining than he ever anticipated. He wasn't mocking her, not really, but the change was undeniable. Recently, she was a different entity entirely. Before, she acted like a frightened kitten in his presence. Alexander recalls the ghost of the woman she used to be. The old Isabelle was a lifeless doll, a marionette with cut strings, unresponsive and hollow. He muses that even if she were injured back then, she wouldn't have reacted. He decides to test the waters, asking about the incident at the last dinner party. Her guard goes up instantly. That question was dangerous. What scheme was he hatching now? Alexander admits he still doesn't understand her motive for that night, but asks if she realizes the magnitude of the chaos she caused. He apologizes for the mess. Isabelle is floored when the Emperor reveals he is actually grateful they removed Marquis Wilhelm. Isabelle blinks in confusion. Alexander locks eyes with her, his golden gaze burning with intensity. He finally reveals the truth. The Marquis was blocking a neighboring empire's expansion, technically legal, but suspicious. However, the Marquis had stumbled upon evidence of tax embezzlement and theft of military supplies. The Emperor adds that even without the full picture, he refuses to bow to such shady movements within his court. Isabelle listens in shock as he reveals the darker truth. He had hired an assassin to critically injure Marquis Wilhelm, but then she had intervened at the party, creating an unexpected opportunity for Alexander. It was a calculated political move. He knew the Marquise's faction would riot against him if he acted directly, but with her intervention, the narrative changed. He explains that all eyes turned to the Mad Empress and her unpredictable actions, masking his true intent. Isabelle's gaze pierced through him. Was that the true reason he shielded her during the ceremony? As expected. The morning tabloids were in a frenzy, obsessed only with the scandalous love triangle and completely ignoring Marquis Wilhelm's downfall. The Emperor played his cards perfectly, explaining that he had dispatched royal physicians to treat the noble injured by the Empress's outburst. It was a calculated move. The 8 weeks of recovery would buy Alexander ample time to expose the Marquise's corruption without interference. With a cold, calculating gaze, he asked Isabelle if she was finally satisfied now that her enemy had been stripped of his power. A shrewd smile played on Alexander's lips as he revealed that even the Marchioness was relieved, noting that half the palace women secretly despised the man. Then, the Emperor dropped the facade and proposed a dangerous new arrangement, a collaborative partnership between husband and wife. His plan was simple yet deceptive in the public eye. They would remain a hostile, estranged couple, but in the shadows they would work as allies. He listed the strategic advantages, but Isabelle cut him off cold, declaring they had no relationship to salvage and flatly rejecting His Majesty's offer. Isabelle had zero intention of playing house. Her only goal was to sever ties with her future ex-husband, not deepen them. Sparks of tension crackled in the air between them as Alexander warned that her stubbornness left him with no other choice. When Isabelle demanded to know what he meant, he countered with a mysterious, alternative proposal, one that might actually pique her interest. Alexander leaned in, his voice dropping as he confessed he was willing to do absolutely anything for her, making Isabelle realize just how formidable he truly was. The Empress demanded he stop speaking in riddles, his relentless pressure only fueling her growing irritation. She was a woman who would walk through fire and ice to get what she wanted. Leaving Alexander to cross his arms and reassess his opponent, he chuckled, admitting they were two of a kind in their stubbornness, and declared that this was now a game where the best player should win. Isabelle threw her head back and laughed, mocking his confidence while warning him that in this clash of wills, they both might end up bleeding. With a feral glint in her eyes, she flashed a defiant look and warned him that she possessed very sharp teeth. Isabelle was no damsel in distress. Suddenly, something shifted in Alexander's gaze. As he reached out, the air around them thickened with an undeniable magnetic pull. Isabelle froze in surprise as he closed the distance, his desire to touch her overwhelming his logic as his fingers grazed her lips. His expression softened into something unrecognizable, fueled by a fervent, burning need he couldn't quite name. In that hushed silence, the Emperor wanted to possess Isabelle more than his throne. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a battlefield to something dangerously romantic. Alexander cupped Isabelle's face with a tenderness that terrified him, his mind racing to understand the strange pounding in his chest. As his fingers traced the line of his wife's jaw, the foolish Emperor failed to realize the terrifying truth: he was falling in love. All rational thought vanished, replaced by a singular, consuming urge to kiss every inch of her face, starting with those defiant lips. He tried to hold back, unsure of her reaction, but gravity won. He gently framed her face with both hands and leaned in to seal their fate. Their breaths mingled, the distance closing to nothing. But destiny had a very different twist in store. Whack! A feather pillow slammed into the Emperor's face with brute force, leaving him stunned and blinking in confusion. Isabelle gripped her weapon tightly, her eyes wide with shock as she demanded to know what on earth went through his head. Absolutely furious, she accused him of losing his mind and pummeled him again, screaming that this cheap seduction trick wouldn't stop the divorce. Alexander raised his hands in surrender, begging the enraged Empress to calm down before she did actual damage. But Isabelle was past the point of reason. She shoved him out and slammed the door shut, leaving the Emperor standing in the hallway, utterly devastated. Inside, she tossed the pillow back onto the bed, fuming at the sheer audacity of the man who had just been unceremoniously kicked out of his own room. How dare he try to romance her in the middle of a divorce war that near kiss had shaken her to her very core. Finally, the adrenaline faded, and she realized she needed to purge that moment from her mind immediately. She convinced herself that a man like Alexander could never truly love her. After all, his heart was script-bound to belong to Sasha. To Isabelle, he was just a character in a romantic fantasy novel, bound by plot armor and pre-written destinies. In the original story, the villainous Isabelle had begged for his scraps and got nothing, so this sudden interest made zero narrative sense. Kissing someone you don't care about was a waste of time, she reasoned, even if his devastatingly handsome face had broken 1,000 hearts. Yet, a treacherous question lingered. Why did her heart flutter at the thought of a man who wasn't supposed to love her? The next morning broke over the palace, finding Isabelle exhausted and bleary-eyed from a night of tossed, restless sleep. As she dragged herself out of bed, she irritably pinned the blame for her dark circles squarely on Alexander. She told herself she was lucky she kicked him out. If she had actually scarred the Emperor's face, she'd be facing treason charges instead of a headache. Paranoia crept in, as she wondered if the Emperor planned to punish her for the pillow assault, but surely he would have struck by now. His silence was unnerving, but since no guards had come to arrest her, perhaps he had decided to let the humiliation slide. Pushing the awkward encounter aside, Isabelle steeled herself. The Empress had an empire to run, and no time for romantic complications. She was the guardian of tradition, championing cultural events and the welfare of the common people. It was a delicate dance of cultivating diplomacy with smaller kingdoms. These were the invisible threads that held the empire together, often unnoticed, but absolutely essential. By law, these heavy burdens were meant to be shared between the Empress and the consort, yet Sasha remained blissfully ignorant of her duties. 6 long months had dragged on since that woman arrived at court. Isabelle picked up her quill, her grip tight with frustration. Exhaustion had seeped into her very bones. She longed for a moment of peace, wishing the Empire would grant her just a sliver of respite. Her maids rushed to her side, sensing her fatigue. They offered to shoulder her burdens, but Isabelle instinctively waved them off, claiming she was fine. But then, a dark realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. She was the villainess of this tale. She commanded the maids to wait. Meanwhile, across the palace, a very different scene unfolded. Maids fawned over Sasha, praising her silken hair and porcelain skin. They giggled, wondering if Emperor Alexander adored her flawless complexion. But suddenly, the bedroom doors crashed open with a thunderous boom. Sasha jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She stammered, completely shocked by the Empress's explosive entrance. Isabelle's laughter rang out, sharp and manic. She slammed a stack of documents onto the table. While she slaved away, Sasha was busy being pampered. Playtime was over. It was time for the consort to carry her share of the royal burden. Isabelle's eyes narrowed dangerously. Why don't you stop being such a lazy woman? Later, a strange calm settled over the palace as Isabelle sipped her tea. Finally, the Empress tasted the sweet nectar of peace and quiet. A satisfied smirk played on her lips. She had dumped every ounce of work onto Sasha, knowing full well the consort would crumble under the pressure. Sasha had begged on her knees for a month, even a week to learn, but Isabelle was merciless. Not a single extra day. The deadline was now. The consort tried to use the Emperor as a shield, claiming Alexander ordered her to take time off to rest. But Isabelle stood like an immovable mountain. Alexander's words held no power over her anymore. The Empress demanded to know what Sasha had been doing all these months. She already knew the answer. Disaster was inevitable. Predictably, Sasha was useless. Essential maintenance was ignored, and parts of the palace began to fall into disrepair. She appointed fools to diplomatic posts and wasted the treasury on trinkets. The palace was a complex machine, and Sasha was stripping its gears. It took only 3 days. 3 days for the Empire's administration to spiral into absolute chaos. Desperate servants crawled back to Isabelle, begging her to return. The situation had become critical. As their pleas grew louder, our protagonists realized a bitter truth. Isabelle had sacrificed everything for them, yet received zero gratitude until now. Fear flickered in their eyes. Even Isabelle found it hard to watch her hard work crumble into dust before her eyes. But she had to stay strong. She had to maintain her mask of villainy. She glared at the trembling servants, who dared to disturb her rest. Had she not made her lack of interest crystal clear? Isabelle asked a simple question. Where is Alexander while his palace burns? The servants fell into a shamed silence. Finally, they confessed. The consort's assistants were killing themselves to help, but Sasha was simply a lost cause. Isabelle knew the truth. All the help in the world couldn't fix a mind as empty as Sasha's, but she refused to break. She would not go back to being their doormat. Enough was enough. Isabelle slammed her hand down, bringing an end to the conversation. She banished everyone from her presence to continue her scheme, but the moment the room cleared, an uninvited shadow appeared. Alexander stood there, his gaze intense. He demanded she resume her duties, claiming he would personally tutor the noble consort. He had the audacity to suggest her workload would decrease, as if doing her a favor. A spark of irritation flared in Isabelle's chest. Not only did he raise his voice, but he dared to use that title, noble consort. Sensing her mood, he backed down. He apologized, admitting his insensitivity had only poured oil on the fire. Alexander lowered his head. He didn't expect forgiveness for his foolishness, but swore on his honor it wouldn't happen again. Isabelle scoffed. Too much had transpired within these cold walls. His authority meant nothing here. He shifted his stance. This was no longer an order from an emperor. It was a plea to a partner, a desperate request to the Empress. His vulnerability caught her off guard. A sincere apology from the man who broke her. That was unexpected. But his words were wind. She cared nothing for his regret or Sasha's suffering. However, she saw an opening. She zeroed in on his promise. He swore he would never let this failure happen again. Put it in writing, she commanded. A memorandum binding him to educate his consort and split the labor fairly. Alexander agreed, hoping to rebuild trust. But Isabelle wasn't finished. There had to be a condition if the agreement was shattered. A chilling, satisfied smile spread across Isabelle's face. The price for failure was simple: divorce. Alexander stood like a statue, silence hanging heavy between them. Though irritation flickered in his eyes, he accepted the terms of their deal. He swore a solemn oath on his very name, commanding the divorce papers be brought for his signature at once. Isabelle watched him, baffled. Why not just cast her aside and crown his beloved consort? Why walk such a thorny path when the easy road lay right there? Yet, in his own twisted way, the emperor was a man of his word. Meanwhile, Sasha's reality was far less glamorous. 5 royal tutors and 10 grueling hours of lessons every single day. It was an academic hell rivaling the entrance exams for an elite university. While the consort studied, Isabelle went to war with the paperwork. She tackled the mountain of incompetence left behind by Sasha, working with a ferocity that bordered on madness. It took her a mere 15 days to conquer the chaos. Bringing order to such disaster was no small feat, yet she made it look effortless. Whispers of admiration rippled through the palace staff like wildfire. The servants gazed at her with renewed worship, marveling at her elegance. But Isabelle simply waved it off, uncomfortable with the sudden adulation. But shadows have ears. Sasha stood nearby, listening to the maid's gush. Every word of praise for the empress was a dagger to her pride, igniting a fury deep within. Inside the palace walls, the gossip mill turned. The maids marveled at the empress's brilliant strategy, hiring true experts in administration. How did she even possess such foresight? They whispered. One maid leaned in, eager to share her theory. She had recruited a triad of geniuses. First, the official master of palace management. Then came the head of charity, followed by the director of culture and arts. Under her guidance, they were performing miracles. One maid recounted her recent encounter with Isabelle. Eyes shining, the empress was not just capable, she was profoundly humble. Her composure was absolute, regal yet kind. As the maids chattered happily in the garden, Sasha passed by, a dark cloud in paradise. The consort swallowed her bitterness, listening to the enemy's praise, but she would not stay silent for long. Days later, the imperial consort hosted her own grand tea party. It was a spectacle of nature. The guests gasped, never having seen such an ocean of vibrant blooms in one place. There must be over 4,000 stems here, a noblewoman exclaimed. Sasha smiled sweetly, extending a blossom. Do you find it pleasing? Then, with practiced innocence, she dropped the bomb. Every single petal was a personal gift from Alexander himself. I told him it was too much. Sasha sighed dramatically, but he simply insisted. The noble lady swooned, enchanted by the emperor's apparent obsession with his consort. However, amidst the fawning, one voice cut through the sweetness with a sharper edge. Count Damien, a blonde noble with a knowing look, spoke up. You ladies forget how terrifying His Majesty is in the council room. He would never show such softness unless he was truly, madly in love. A noblewoman giggled, protesting. But the emperor is such an adorable man. Damien's expression darkened. Only to fair maidens. Do not forget the mountains of corpses piled up by his whims. He nearly let slip a darker state secret, but caught his tongue just in time. Sasha shifted, the count's sharp words making her skin crawl. She quickly put on her mask of innocence. Alexander can be quite spirited, she admitted, though I confess, my poor head understands nothing of politics. The arrogant count scoffed, and nor should you. Politics is no place for a woman. The emperor carries the weight of the realm alone. But wait! A young lady interjected. I heard Lady Sasha has been buried in books lately. Count Damien blinked, struck speechless. The fragile flower was studying statecraft to better serve the empire. I only wish to be useful, Sasha said, eyes downcast. I know I have been a burden. His Majesty loves me so deeply, yet I have given so little in return. She swayed slightly, hand to her forehead. Perhaps I have overdone it. All this studying has left me quite dizzy. Panic erupted as the ladies called for servants. Sasha offered a weak, tragic smile. Forgive me. I never wanted you to see me in such a state. Then came the masterstroke. I only wanted to stop burdening Her Majesty the Empress, she whispered, to finally carry my own weight. Her gaze swept over the concerned guests, watching the seeds of doubt take root as they murmured about her noble sacrifice. Deep inside, Sasha laughed. A dark satisfaction bloomed in her chest, even as she reassured the crowd she was fine. I just wish to be as brilliant as the Empress, she sighed. She had the genius idea to hire expensive specialists to do her work, while I can only struggle to learn it all myself. The words hit the tea party like a thunderclap. Oh, please do not judge, Sasha pleaded hastily. Isabelle is the Empress. Surely she thought very carefully before outsourcing her duties, even if it did cost the treasury. Nearly 5 million gold coins. Count Damien's jaw dropped. He knew of the Empress's taste for luxury, but this This was extravagance that even surpassed the notorious Marquis Wilhelm. A collective gasp tore through the garden. In the entire history of the empire, such wasteful spending was unheard of. Whispers turned to scowls. Was a woman who threw away gold while her consort worked herself to exhaustion truly fit to wear the crown? The Count narrowed his eyes at Sasha, a realization dawning. Come to think of it, was it not her father who controlled the imperial accounts? He dared to lecture the ladies, claiming that men in politics required superior logic and reason. Their eyes bore into him with cold disdain. With misplaced confidence, one of the nobles dared to suggest that the emperor speak directly to Isabelle about her expenses, praising his own logic. Count Damien blinked in confusion, asking why such a heavy burden was placed on his shoulders. The young noblewoman insisted he was their only hope, as he alone had the emperor's ear. Panic flickered in his eyes as he stammered that he was merely a newcomer to the imperial court. But the trap was already set. The surrounding ladies teased his ego, reminding him of his boastful tales and challenging him to prove he was truly a brave man. Just as his resolve wavered, a soft, desperate voice called out to him. It was Sasha. She pleaded that his influence with the emperor would be her salvation. Tears shimmered like diamonds in the consort's eyes as she vowed to do her utmost to soothe Alexander's impending wrath. Count Damien stood frozen, his defenses crumbling against her sorrowful beauty. Finally, the last of his hesitation shattered. Fire ignited in his chest. He was now determined to confront the emperor himself. The afternoon tea party continued, masking the conspiracy brewing beneath. Internally, Sasha smiled with chilling satisfaction. It had all been far too easy. Noble women were sharp and cautious, difficult to manipulate, but a man surrounded by adoring flowers, it took almost nothing to push him into a reckless crusade. Sasha watched her scheme unfold with dark delight. Her pieces were moving exactly as planned. The scene shifts to a new dawn at the imperial palace. The atmosphere was heavy as noblemen gathered for the imperial audience. Among them stood Count Damien, a bead of sweat betraying his second thoughts. Fear gnawed at him, yet the memory of Sasha's tearful plea during the tea party burned brighter than his apprehension. He fell into deep reflection, steeling his resolve to be the hero his friend needed. The council members took their seats, the air thick with tension. Damien's hand trembled slightly as it rested on his documents. He convinced himself that this agenda was righteous, that this fight was necessary. To him, it was an absolute farce that a reckless woman like Isabelle sat on the throne as empress. How dared she make the delicate consort cry? In his mind, it was Sasha who deserved the crown, not that tyrant Isabelle. A patriot like him could not stand idly by while the empire suffered. The time for hesitation was over. It was time to act. Before Emperor Alexander could even begin the official agenda, Count Damien shot up from his seat, declaring loudly that he had urgent words to speak. His uncle, the Marquis Damien, paled instantly. He hissed a reprimand, demanding to know why his nephew was speaking without seeking permission first. But Count Damien bristled at the interruption. He was no longer a child to be silenced by his uncle. This was his moment to shine, to prove his worth to the empire. He announced with conviction that he must address a grave matter regarding the current state of affairs, specifically, the conduct of the Empress. On cue, two assistants rushed forward to distribute the investigative reports he had compiled. The Marquis stood abruptly, fury in his eyes, demanding how the Count dared to present such sensitive material without his seal of approval. Alexander raised a hand, silencing the room. He told the Marquis to let the boy speak. Count Damien sighed in relief, mistaking the Emperor's amusement for interest. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes gleaming dangerously. He claimed to be very intrigued by this proposal for a public debate regarding the Empress's punishments. The Emperor scanned the room, asking if this bold stance was truly the Count's honest opinion. Damien puffed out his chest and confirmed it was. A ghost of a smile played on Alexander's lips as he urged the young man to continue. Emboldened by the Emperor's attention, Damien began his grand speech. As he passionately detailed his investigation, the older, seasoned members of the Imperial Council whispered among themselves, sensing a storm. They assumed the young Count was merely jealous of the older generation's power, but Damien was blind to their skepticism. In that moment, he was drunk on his own importance, believing his genius was finally being recognized and that a promotion was within his grasp. Even the Emperor was smiling throughout the monologue. To Damien, it looked like approval. In reality, the predator was watching its prey. When the speech concluded, Alexander praised the presentation with eerie calm. Then, he asked one final question: was this opinion solely his own? Count Damien, beaming with pride, revealed that he and 6 other noble friends had worked together to reach these righteous conclusions. The trap snapped shut. Alexander's smile vanished as he coldly declared that there were, therefore, only 7 utter fools standing in this court. The Emperor's voice turned to ice. This fool had incited a public debate defending a man the Empress had punished for good reason, Marquis Wilhelm. Damien's uncle listened in pure agony as Alexander asked the nephew if he had ever bothered to ask why. the Empress had acted so harshly. The Emperor called for his secretary. The secretary returned instantly with a heavy stack of documents. Alexander suggested the Count read them, provided his head was used for thinking and not just decoration. He commanded every lord present to read the truth written on those pages. Alexander tossed the papers toward Count Damien. They scattered like falling leaves. With trembling hands, the Count picked one up. Horror washed over him. The documents revealed that the Marquis he defended was guilty of high treason, exporting military supplies and embezzling imperial taxes. Gasps echoed through the hall. Another noble stood frozen, speechless. The evidence was undeniable. The lords nodded in grim agreement. Alexander revealed the final nail in the coffin. Marquis Wilhelm had been preparing to defect to the enemy kingdom of Rudeken. When the Empress discovered this treachery, she risked her own reputation to crush the traitor with her own hands before he could escape. Count Damien read line after line, his face draining of color. The gravity of his mistake crushed him. He had defended a traitor. His tongue felt like lead. Desperate to salvage the situation, Damien stammered, trying to pivot to the Empress's spending on specialists, praying it was a violation of protocol. Alexander's eyes went cold. He immediately demanded that the Count read aloud the specific documents. These were the strict conditions under which Sasha had left the palace, back when she was entrusted with those very duties. The Emperor recalled Isabelle's wisdom. She had realized that relying on only 2 people for palace affairs was dangerous. One illness could bring the empire to a halt. Count Damien stood there, his mouth hanging open, utterly speechless in the face of undeniable facts. Rising from his throne like a looming storm, Alexander asked a terrifying question: what mattered more, clinging to old customs or ensuring the empire's security? The Emperor's voice dropped an octave as he declared that only one problem remained to be solved. He needed to decide the fate of the other 6 fools who had dared to slander the Empress without knowing the truth. Without hesitation, he commanded the Imperial Guards to drag Count Damien to the darkest depths of the dungeons. Far from the chaos of the throne room, Isabelle sipped her tea, thinking that the time was ripe to discuss their divorce with Alexander once more. Yet, an unsettling feeling gnawed at her. A few days drifted by, finding Sasha resting in her chambers. The consort sighed, a shadow of melancholy on her face. Her bait had failed. What else could she expect from such a young, immature man? She recalled that there had been a count before who served her purposes better. Her brooding was interrupted by a concerned maid, asking if the young consort was feeling unwell or burdened by heavy thoughts. Sasha dismissed it as nothing serious, though the maid insisted she looked deep in contemplation of difficult matters. Finally, Sasha confessed the source of her gloom. The Emperor had not visited her in a long time. The maids looked devastated on her behalf. They tried to comfort her, reminding her that the ruler of the empire was simply a man burdened with work. But the maid insisted that he used to visit even when busy. Sasha whispered that she simply wanted to be useful to him. Suddenly, a maid's eyes lit up. She suggested Sasha wield her power as a goddess, the unique ability to bring new concepts from other worlds. She urged Sasha to create a new narrative, something never seen before. The consort stood up, her energy instantly renewed. It was brilliant. This was a feat Isabelle could never replicate. Sasha prayed the Empress wouldn't remain arrogant for much longer. October arrived, painting the trees in vibrant shades of orange as birds prepared their nests for the turning season. To welcome this changing tide, Sasha decided to host a grand event, showcasing her divine status. Isabelle read the invitation letter. Noting that Sasha was presenting herself as a deity, our protagonist frowned. This wasn't in the original storyline. Scanning the parchment again, she realized this event was completely unprecedented in history. The Empress concluded that the consort had likely concocted this scheme solely to interfere with her own plans. Furthermore, if Sasha wanted a relationship, she should focus on gifts or quality time. Isabelle's mind drifted to Alexander's recent, unexpected affection. He seemed genuinely happy to see her lately, but Isabelle only felt annoyance. His intentional visits were becoming too frequent. Why was he acting like this regardless? It meant nothing to her, provided Sasha was the one he truly cared for. Curiosity got the better of her. Isabelle rose from her armchair, satisfied to have received the invitation. It would be worth attending, just to see the spectacle. Soon, guests began to flood the palace, nobles chatting cheerfully. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd as a figure appeared in a delicate, light pink dress. It was Sasha, the imperial consort, flaunting a style far ahead of its time. A ripple of shock went through the guests. She wondered if the hemline above her knees was too scandalous for this kingdom, where long gowns were the rule even in summer. But Sasha pushed the doubt aside. She knew she had to rebuild her crumbling influence within the palace walls. To do that, she had to stand out. She had to be the center of attention during this speech. She told herself she didn't care about the nobles' opinions. They wouldn't dare move against her. Knowing her divine identity, yet the threat of sabotage lingered. Isabelle was a problem simply because she was a woman capable of stealing the spotlight in Alexander's gaze. Sasha steeled herself. This event would be a battlefield of beauty and influence. She was certain Isabelle would arrive dripping in glamour to outshine her. The consort began her walk toward the stage. She reminded herself that not long ago, Isabelle was just an ordinary girl. Sasha bit her lip, masking her anxiety with a practiced smile. Today, she was determined to be the true main character, no matter what anyone else did. Finally reaching the grand golden hall, she faced the sea of nobles and introduced herself as Sasha, the imperial consort. But before she could finish her opening remarks, a small detail betrayed her composure. Her hands were trembling violently, fighting to maintain her facade. She announced that this was her first time hosting such an event. Internally, her heart pounded against her ribs, though she kept her face like a mask of porcelain. But as she spoke, she noticed the guests' attention drifting elsewhere, caught by something far more intriguing. Seated high upon her throne, Isabelle drummed her fingers against the velvet armrest, a rhythm of silent dominance. Sasha couldn't tear her eyes away. Consumed by a burning question, what was the secret power behind that dress? The guests barely spared the consort a glance, their attention magnetized by the throne. It seemed impossible that the Empress's gown could so thoroughly eclipse hers, yet the eyes of the court lied to no one. Commanding the room, Isabelle demanded the guests' attention, her voice laced with mock concern as she noted the imperial consort seemed struck dumb. She urged the crowd to look forward, sparing the poor girl the embarrassment of their wandering eyes. With a gracious nod and a razor-sharp smile, the Empress invited Sasha to proceed. Though shaken to her core by Isabelle's sheer audacity, Sasha forced herself to continue. She offered a trembling thank you, her voice fragile, yet desperation fueled her resolve. She had to finish this speech. Just as she found her rhythm, a hush fell over the room, drawing her gaze to a heart-stopping scene. Alexander was stripping off his coat, tenderly draping it over Isabelle's exposed legs. Our protagonist immediately refused the gesture, claiming the chill didn't bother her in the slightest. But the Emperor was adamant, insisting she protect herself from the cold. Sasha's mind went blank, the words dying in her throat as she watched her beloved Alexander lavish attention on Isabelle. She swallowed the rising lump in her throat, vowing that this would be the final time the Empress made a fool of her. As the hostess of this grand event, Sasha steeled herself. She would not allow anyone, not even the Empress, to ruin her moment. Regaining the floor, the girl pivoted to a topic sure to dazzle the miracle of smartphones. She described the essential device from her homeland, painting a picture of advanced magic. Isabelle, recalling memories of her past life, mused that such an artifact might genuinely intrigue the kingdom's people. Perhaps they would even revere it as a royal treasure. But the illusion was shattered when a blonde nobleman voiced his skepticism. He demanded to know the logic. How could an object fit in a palm, yet wield such godlike functions? He challenged her to produce this smartphone right then and there. Sasha froze, flushed and flustered, unsure how to navigate such a direct request. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Surely, she possessed the skill to craft one. One noblewoman praised her eloquence, while another lauded her talent, backing Sasha into a suffocating corner. Was a captivating story not enough? Face burning with shame, she was forced to confess to the court that creating a smartphone was beyond her power. The nobleman scoffed, asking how a supposed goddess could lack such ability. Desperate, Sasha stammered a weak defense. She was merely an apprentice in the arts of creation. Isabelle, legs now warm beneath the Emperor's coat, watched the train wreck unfold in silence. A satisfied smirk played on her lips. The fiasco was delicious. In this empire, university implied a solemn vow to knowledge, a concept Sasha treated too lightly. Here, if one walked the path of the university, it meant a life dedicated to the absolute mastery of education. While many nobles skipped such rigorous study, claiming to be an apprentice implied a level of competence Sasha clearly lacked. If she truly was a student of her world, she should have been capable of backing up her words. Isabelle glanced at Alexander, wondering why the doting partner stood idle while his lover drowned in humiliation. A call for silence cut through the tension. Sasha locked eyes with Isabelle across the hall, a gaze returned with cool indifference. The consort seethed with fury and embarrassment. What was that look? Was the Empress feigning empathy? Determined to save face, Sasha refused to let the event end in ruin. She whipped around to her maids, demanding they bring out her secret weapon. The servants hesitated, whispering nervously that preparations weren't complete and they needed more time. Sasha snapped, her patience gone. She commanded them to fetch it immediately. Composing herself, she thanked the guests and announced a feast of exotic delicacies. Isabelle leaned forward. Curiosity piqued. What culinary disaster had she concocted now? What could it be? At first glance, the reception was promising. A noblewoman praised the vibrant colors of the meal. Another guest complimented the pleasing portions and sweet aroma. Sasha invited them to indulge in the buffet freely, confident this would turn the tide. She prayed their taste buds would be delighted, hoping a good meal would wash away the earlier awkwardness once she explained the recipes. But disaster struck instantly. The crowd recoiled, complaining the food was unpleasantly sticky. One guest struggled to chew the texture, while another gasped, fanning his mouth at the unexpected spice. Sasha stood frozen, Stunned as her guest begged for water, quietly, Isabelle picked up a toothpick. She speared a morsel and tasted it. To our protagonist, the flavors were nostalgic and tasty, though the menu choice was admittedly bizarre for this setting. The guests, however, looked at the plates with growing suspicion, wondering if it was even edible. Isabelle realized the era of the kingdom's palate wasn't ready for the texture of honey rice cakes or the heat of kimchi dumplings. Even in her past life, these were acquired tastes for foreigners. It would be a shame to see such delicious dishes thrown away due to ignorance. Isabelle pondered for a moment. Meanwhile, Sasha was on the verge of collapse, trembling violently as her plans crumbled to dust. She was supposed to be the main character, the star of this world, yet humiliation was her only prize. Paralyzed and utterly lost, she watched her world fall apart. Suddenly, a sharp clap echoed through the hall. Isabelle demanded the room's attention. With regal grace, she announced that she wished to offer her deepest gratitude to everyone for gracing the event with their presence. Sasha stood there, utterly desolate. Her spirit crumbled as she listened to Isabelle reveal a simple dish prepared with the exact same ingredients the consort had used, a direct challenge to her skills. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the guests wondered what strange cuisine the Empress was describing. Isabelle simply smiled, a look of supreme satisfaction painting her features. She observed the guests' hesitation. Fear flickered in their eyes as they stared at the red dish. Our protagonist scoffed internally. To her, there was nothing terrifying about a little kimchi. However, the combination was admittedly a pity. Forcing these unaccustomed nobles to consume such spicy food against their will felt a bit excessive, even for her. Suddenly, Alexander's deep voice cut through the tension, calling for his wife. As she turned, the emperor declared his intent to eat. She raised a brow, asking if he dared to taste it first. He countered immediately, asking if there was something wrong with the dish. His words carried a sharp edge as he added that he hoped this meal wouldn't be as catastrophic as her previous attempts. Isabelle explained calmly that there was no reason to abstain, though she feigned concern that such bold flavors might shock his precious refined palate. A slight, dangerous smile played on his lips. He leaned in, asking where all her sudden confidence had vanished to. Our protagonist felt a spark of irritation ignite in her chest. Isabelle met his gaze and replied coolly, "Very well, then." She gestured to the spread, informing him she had prepared a buffet and he could serve himself whatever he pleased. Alexander noted that this fiery attitude looked more like the Isabelle he used to know. Our protagonist froze. What the hell did he mean by that? A wave of anxiety washed over her. Had he noticed she was different? As he piled his plate, she explained her methods. Since she couldn't find all the necessary ingredients, she had been forced to get creative with her culinary alchemy. A heavy silence descended upon the banquet hall. Not a single soul dared to breathe. The emperor stood there, his mouth slightly ajar after the first bite. Isabelle felt a spike of alarm, her heart racing as she awaited his verdict. Then, Alexander spoke. The food was delicious. The entire room was thunderstruck. How could the flavor be so unique? He analyzed the taste, noting that the spicy seasoning had dissipated into the water, leaving a pleasant warmth rather than a burning heat. The bacon and vegetables danced in perfect harmony. The cheese added a rich, creamy layer that complemented the savory notes flawlessly. Isabelle blinked, wondering how he could deconstruct the dish so perfectly. The paralyzed guest finally moved, unsure what to grab. Our protagonist let out a breath of immense relief. Joy bubbled within her as she watched them devour the fried kimchi and pancakes. Isabelle had proven herself not just as an empress, but as a master of determination. In this empire, soy sauce did not exist, so she had improvised a mixture of salt and rice to mimic the flavor. Suddenly, a guest shouted, asking for more pancakes. Praise began to pour in from every corner of the hall. The protagonist chuckled to herself, imagining they were simply enjoying it because the poor things were starving. Still, a warm sense of satisfaction settled in her chest. The disastrous dinner had turned into a triumph. Sasha had already fled the scene in silence. Isabelle stepped up to manage the rest of the event. She refused to let Alexander witness even a moment of failure. Perhaps the concert wasn't the best time to dwell on complex thoughts. Instead, her curiosity piqued. She needed to know what plans Alexander was hiding. Isabelle accepted his invitation to dine together, acknowledging his help in tasting the food. But beneath her calm exterior, she remained wary of his plotting. She steeled her mind, preparing to stay on high alert for whatever trap lay ahead. Alexander explained his intentions plainly. He still wanted to convince her to collaborate with him, but his eyes suggested that business wasn't the only reason for this invitation. She questioned his motives internally. Was this why he had abandoned her in the past? Why decide to help her now? The emperor confessed he had no idea she possessed such hidden skills. Isabelle lied smoothly, claiming that after their marriage, she had simply begun to take an interest in the culinary arts. Alexander asked if that was the truth. Looking at him under the moonlight, our protagonist thought he was truly a fascinating, enigmatic man. She had read about his character in the original story. Perhaps that prior knowledge was the key to decoding his actions in every situation. When she first read the novel, her impression was clear. Alexander was a tyrant emperor who cared for nothing and no one but Sasha. Clearly, that should have been the reality of this world. However, glancing at him as they strolled side by side, the narrative seemed to have shifted. In the afternoon glow of the Imperial Garden, Isabelle realized Alexander was terrifyingly observant. He was a man who would supposedly care for nothing other than the person he loved. As she walked, a melancholic thought struck her soon. They would become strangers once more. Yet, there were still mysteries she needed to unravel. Suddenly, the man pointed into the distance. There stood the Isabella flowers blooms that were breathtakingly beautiful, delicate, yet deadly poisonous. Some still used them for medicine. Isabelle felt a flush of embarrassment. She had assumed Alexander was taking her to his bedroom, yet here they were in the garden. A little irritated by her own misunderstanding, she snapped that surely they weren't here just to gaze at flowers. Alexander replied softly, stating that appreciating the view with his empress held a certain undeniable charm. Isabelle's voice turned cold. She asked if he was referring to the same empress he had abandoned for almost 3 years. His gaze shifted instantly, the light dimming in his eyes. At last, he replied that she was right. It had not been fair. The admission shocked Isabelle. This change in attitude was completely unexpected. In the past, he had offered nothing but flimsy excuses whenever divorce was mentioned. His mindset seemed to have undergone a transformation. Clenching her fist tightly, she reminded herself of his massive ego. That acknowledgement couldn't have been sincere. She wouldn't be fooled. She demanded to know if he intended to apologize. Alexander replied with a chilling smile, claiming he would offer empty apologies 1,000 times over if it meant she would never mention divorce again. For a man like him, weaving lies to secure a powerful political ally was as easy as breathing. Isabelle opened her mouth to retort, but the words died in her throat. Instead, she turned her gaze to the garden, feigning interest in the blooming flowers. Alexander closed the distance between them, his voice low. He declared that if this arrangement wasn't what he truly desired, then the two of them were simply even. He whispered that, perhaps, one day, he might actually regret his actions. Isabelle remained silent, but his cryptic warning sparked a flicker of intrigue within her. The Emperor urged her to let it go, dismissing his own dark mood as nonsense, but Isabelle knew better. Recalling the original novel, she had long ago diagnosed him as a sociopath. Every atrocity he committed, every life he extinguished without hesitation, was all for the sake of one woman, Sasha. Aside from his beloved consort, he viewed the rest of humanity as nothing more than disposable trash. Remembering this terrifying truth, our protagonist felt a chill run down her spine. She met his gaze with feigned innocence, telling him she had no idea what he was rambling about. Isabelle questioned if memories were things that should simply be forgotten. Alexander paused, letting the silence stretch before noting with satisfaction that she was merely trying to ignore him. The protagonist scoffed, making it clear that his presence brought her absolutely no pleasure, not even a little bit. Yet, seeing him remain completely unshaken by her rejection, she found his composure deeply unsettling. He stepped closer, looming over her. He declared he didn't care if she believed him or not. Bringing her here as an ally was not a trap. He insisted that his only intention was to share the beauty of the garden with her. Extending a hand toward her, he announced it was time to leave. Isabelle leaned back instinctively, her survival instincts screaming against accepting his offer. Was this tyrant using his dazzling beauty to manipulate her? In the end, she took his hand, stealing her heart with the knowledge that she would never fall for his honey traps. To her, no meant no. She would rewrite her destiny and change her life. But falling in love with Alexander was not part of the script. Surprisingly, he confessed that he had truly enjoyed their afternoon together. Isabelle deflected the compliment, telling him to thank the imperial consort since Sasha was the mastermind behind the event. She then asked if he didn't want to check on the party downstairs, so he didn't answer. His golden eyes bore into hers, intense and unreadable. Gently, the Emperor tightened his grip on his wife's hand, leaving her completely stunned. He bowed low and pressed a tender kiss against her knuckles. Isabelle froze, unable to comprehend the meaning behind such an intimate gesture. As his lips parted from her soft skin, Alexander looked up, a mischievous, almost boyish smile playing on his lips. Furious and flustered, she demanded an explanation. Divorce was imminent. Alexander simply laughed, claiming this was how a proper lady deserved to be treated. A flush of heat exploded across her cheeks. Isabelle stammered that if their farewells were done, she was leaving immediately. Slamming the heavy doors behind her, she bid him a sharp goodnight, but alone in the safety of her room, her mind raced, replaying the moment over and over. Isabelle reminded herself that he was loyal to no one. He was a man who would flirt with the devil himself just to get what he wanted. On the other side of the door, Alexander stood frozen, wondering why he was acting so irrationally. It felt as if he were drunk on her presence. The next morning, the palace was already buzzing with fresh gossip among the nobles. One whispered that the Empress had slapped Marquise Wilhelm, a calculated move to suspend him during the investigation of his dishonesty. Elsewhere, noble ladies chatted excitedly, realizing they had completely misunderstood Isabelle's motives for causing such a scene. They marveled at how noble the Empress was, sacrificing her own reputation to purge corruption from the palace. The incident in the Golden Hall was on everyone's lips. The event could have ended in catastrophe, but she had saved them all. They agreed she was a woman truly born to wear the crown. But lurking in the shadows behind a pillar, Sasha listened to every word. She stood in silence, a storm brewing in her eyes. A few nights later, a maid pleaded with Sasha to eat. The tray was filled with all her favorite delicacies, prepared with care. The maid tried to offer comfort, assuring Sasha that the disaster at the event was not the consort's fault. Sasha coldly replied that she wanted solitude. The maid, however, hesitated, revealing her deep worry since the consort hadn't touched food in 2 whole days. Snapping at the intrusion, Sasha ordered her to get out. She needed to be alone, now. A tense silence filled the room. The maid stood stunned, unable to understand why her gentle mistress was being so harsh. Sasha quickly composed herself, apologizing and claiming stress was the cause of her outburst. She asked once more for the maid to withdraw. The girl finally left, alone at last. Sasha gripped her bedsheets until her knuckles turned white. The reality of the situation was terrifying. How did Isabelle know those recipes? The dishes the Emperor had tasted were kimchi stew and kimchi fried rice. Isabelle had lived in this fantasy empire her entire life. The shaken consort calculated the impossible odds of the Empress inventing a dish identical to one from modern Korea. If Isabelle somehow possessed knowledge of Korean culture, how did she arrive in this world? It shouldn't be possible. Only an oracle possesses the divine power to travel between dimensions. And if a mere mortal attempts to cross the boundaries of worlds, the price is steep, their memories are often reversed. The only logical explanation was simple, yet terrifying. Isabelle must have learned about Korean culture through forbidden texts or by overhearing secret conversations. But Sasha's mind reeled in denial. How could that be possible? The goddess was the only bridge between their dimensions. Only those summoned from other worlds brought such knowledge. Through them. Foreign cultures spread across the empire, preserved forever in history books. Well, it should have been impossible. Isabelle knew things that no one in this world had the right to know. Sasha collapsed onto the bed, her legs giving way. She stared at her own trembling hands. What could she possibly do against such an anomaly? Terror consumed her. The situation had spiraled into a complex web that Sasha was no longer sure she could untangle. For the consort, her entire world was crumbling. Her relationship with Alexander, her social status, and now even her target was turning the tables on her. This was precisely why she had to uncover the truth. She needed to know exactly how Isabelle had obtained that dangerous information. While Sasha plotted, rumors spread like wildfire in the streets. A peasant asked a worker about the commotion. He whispered that a mysterious woman had arrived with an army of guards. It was the Empress herself. Her presence on the common streets sent a shockwave of surprise through the ordinary people. Isabelle smirked, satisfied with the spectacle. She had successfully drawn every eye in the district. After all, citizens always gathered to gawk at royalty. This was Delancha Street. It was the Empire's shadow, a black market where legality was a gray area, the perfect place to acquire suspicious and dangerous items. Isabelle knew this was no place for a noble lady. Her palace maids were practically fainting with worry back home. She felt a twinge of pity for her guards, who looked equally terrified. But the Empress had no choice. She had to commit to the role. Alexander had been acting strangely possessive lately. To force the divorce she so desperately wanted, she needed to create a scandal they couldn't ignore. Wasting a fortune in a shady district would surely be a disgrace to the imperial family. With renewed resolve, she ordered the guards to follow. Isabelle marched into the first shop to begin her spending spree. Her goal was simple, empty her pockets completely. Yet, by late afternoon, Isabelle sat on a bench, face buried in her hands. The Empress was absolutely devastated. She was doomed. Our protagonist had intended to buy suspicious cursed items to ruin her reputation. But at the last shop, her plan backfired spectacularly. She had arrogantly told the merchant to sell her everything. He had asked if she was certain. To her horror, the merchant beamed and declared that they only sold first-rate luxury goods that the Emperor would adore. All she wanted was to escape this world, but now everyone believed she was a loving wife buying gifts for her husband. There had to be another way. She paused, her mind racing for a solution. Suddenly, a loud commotion drew the crowd toward a nearby alley. Isabelle's curiosity piqued. She turned to one of her guards and asked what could possibly be drawing such a crowd. The guard hesitated before explaining. It was an auction house. Isabelle's eyes lit up. An auction. How had she missed such a golden opportunity? Surely, she could find something outrageously expensive there. Without wasting a second, Isabelle stood up and commanded her guards to move out. She imagined finding a spectacular artifact that would guarantee her immediate divorce. Inside, the auctioneer bowed, welcoming the ladies and gentlemen. With a slick smile, he assured the crowd that he possessed the finest merchandise in the entire empire. However, the merchandise he spoke of were not objects. They were prisoners of war, stripped of their humanity under imperial law. Isabelle froze. She had never considered that in this brutal world, human beings could be sold like cattle. She realized with a sinking heart that while cruel, it wasn't illegal. The law had loopholes that allowed such atrocities to exist. The nobles usually avoided these sales, disliking foreigners. Among the captives was a young woman, trembling violently and drowning in sorrow. It was a violation of basic human rights, but here, Isabelle was forced to play by the rules of the nobility. Then it hit her. One of the characters in the original story had a tragic backstory connected to a place just like this. The auctioneer presented the first lot. A girl, barely 18 years old, described as a skilled seamstress with a beautiful face. A single tear rolled down the girl's cheek. That silent cry for help shattered Isabelle's heart. The auction turned her stomach. The bids climbed higher and higher, greedy voices shouting numbers. One buyer offered a massive sum. The auctioneer raised his gavel, asking for final bids. That was when Isabelle snapped. She ordered him to stop. She rose from her seat, shocking the entire room. With eyes burning like cold fire, Isabelle declared that these were orders from the Empress. A hush fell over the crowd. The auctioneer lost his voice. The trembling girl on stage looked up, stunned and fearful. She watched as Isabelle glided past the bidders with terrifying elegance. The Empress made her decree. She, Isabelle of Castile, commanded the auction to end immediately. Everyone was to leave. The auctioneer panicked, trying to protest. He stammered that canceling now would destroy his reputation and cause a massive commercial loss. She shot him a glare sharp as a dagger. Terror instantly gripped his heart. Her power was undeniable, and the fear made perfect sense. Isabelle extended a blank check, a weapon of absolute wealth. She declared that the moment ink touched that paper, every soul here would belong to her. The auctioneer's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. He bowed repeatedly like a servant to a god, proving to our protagonist that he worshipped nothing but coin. As the crowd began to disperse, Isabelle wasted no time. She walked straight toward the greedy merchant and the trembling girl. Her sharp eyes analyzed the situation instantly. These people were strangers in a strange land, likely unable to speak the language and on the brink of starvation. If she left them here, the wolves would circle. Bad men would surely snatch them up and enslave them all over again. Isabelle wrestled with the dilemma. What could one woman do? A heavy silence fell before she finally spoke, her voice ringing with authority. I am responsible for them now. Her gaze swept over the captives. From this moment on, place your trust in me. Then she dropped the bombshell. Not only were they free, but they were coming with her to the imperial palace to work far away from this hellhole. Meanwhile, deep within the palace, the news reached the emperor. The secretary reported that Isabelle had ventured to the notorious Delancha Street. Alexander's fingers tapped rhythmically against the edge of the bathtub. The secretary trembled. He knew that rhythmic tapping was the only sign of the emperor's rising irritation. The official stammered, warning that with the empress in such a filthy district, the reputation of the imperial family was in grave danger. Alexander scoffed, rising from the water. The reputation is not the problem, he snapped. Do you have any idea how dangerous that place is? The secretary fell silent as Alexander finished his bath. The emperor's eyes darkened with resolve. He would have to descend into the slums and retrieve her himself. Back at the auction house, the royal guards tried to intervene. They insisted the palace was no place for commoners and begged her to reconsider. Isabelle turned her cold gaze upon the guards. They were desperate, trying at all costs to stop her from bringing these refugees into the sacred halls of the palace. Silence, she commanded, her aura crushing their defiance. I take full responsibility for their lives. The guards shrank back, looking fearfully at their empress. She issued her decree they would receive a proper education. For 3 hours every day, they would master the imperial language and the laws of the kingdom. The young girl was overcome with emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to thank Isabelle profusely. She collapsed into a deep bow before the empress, crying her heart out. The girl praised Isabelle for her divine mercy. Our protagonist watched in silence, her heart aching. She could only imagine the sheer terror these people had endured up until this moment. It was a cruel world. Prisoners like this young girl lived in the shadow of death, never knowing when their fate would be sealed. Isabelle's voice cut through the air. Guards removed their chains immediately. Take them all to the palace. She had a plan. Since they were adults, 1 year of study would suffice. After that, she would grant them enough gold to stand on their own feet. truly independent. Suddenly, a harsh shouting match caught her attention. A vile, cruel man was berating a young boy, screaming at him to move faster. The child's hands shook uncontrollably. The man sneered, spitting out that all slaves were the same useless trash. Before she could think, Isabelle's body moved on impulse. Rage flared within her. How could a human being harm someone so small? "Stop this instant!" she roared. She demanded to know if the boy was a prisoner. She had bought everyone's freedom. Why was this child left behind? Her fury grew as the filthy merchant explained his twisted logic. The boy was worthless simply because he had a limp. Isabelle glared at the scum. "I am taking the child," she declared. Then she held out her hand. "Give me the whip." The boy on the ground held his breath, paralyzed with fear, unable to imagine the pain that was coming. The Empress stepped forward and snatched the weapon. "You don't seem to know what true danger is," she whispered. Crack, she lashed out, striking the merchant across the face. The blow was severe, leaving a nasty wound, but Isabelle felt a grim satisfaction. "You have no right to harm anyone," she hissed, "especially a child." She gripped the whip tighter, her eyes burning. "If you remain standing there, I will show you what real fear tastes like." The man was terrified. Before the Empress could strike again, he turned on his heel and scrambled away like a rat. The Empress's guard stood frozen, jaw dropped in absolute shock at what he had just witnessed. Our protagonist rubbed her arm. She had only struck once, but her muscles were screaming. The guard awkwardly explained that her body simply wasn't used to such violence. It was only logical. The Empress was a delicate flower who rarely performed physical labor, let alone combat. Regardless, Isabelle smiled internally. This was perfect. Surely, a scandal of this magnitude would force the Emperor to divorce her immediately. Well, by her calculations, she had visited a shady market, liberated slaves, and assaulted a merchant. It was the ultimate disgrace. Her guards looked completely done with life. Isabelle's heart soared soon. She would finally be free. But then, a small voice broke her reverie. The boy began to thank her for her kindness. Isabelle, worried, crouched down. "Are you all right?" She wanted to arrange a doctor for him immediately, but his next words caught her off guard. The plot was twisting again. The boy admitted he had been weak before, but his eyes burned with new fire. "I will devote my entire life to repaying this debt," he vowed. Isabelle leaned closer, stunned. Beneath the grime, she saw silver hair and piercing eyes. Who exactly was this beautiful child? She turned to the boy, asking for his name. He hesitated before answering. Caleb. That name rang a bell in Isabelle's memory. It was him. One of the male leads from the original novel, the boy destined to appear halfway through the plot. But do not be fooled by that innocent face. Hidden within him lay a twisted darkness. A victim of war, enslaved since childhood, he bore the heavy sins of his parents' capture. Yet, his genius could not be caged. He taught himself magic, ascending to the seventh circle. A future archmage was standing right here. With that overwhelming power, he would shatter his chains. He was destined to found the shadowy informant guild. And in the original timeline, his heart belonged to Sasha. As an archmage, he would move mountains for her. But looking at this child, she wondered, could this really be the legendary Caleb? Right there in the chaotic auction hall, Isabelle gently cupped the boy's face in her hands. She studied him closely. The wavy brown hair, those long lashes, that deceivingly innocent face matched the description perfectly. By the timeline, he should be 16. Yet, he looked so small, fragile, much younger than he should be. Isabelle's heart clenched. Years of slavery and starvation had stunted his growth. Even his spirit seemed broken. Far more timid than the character she knew. Was his true nature just dormant? Caleb opened his mouth, trying to speak. Suddenly, she realized how tight her grip was. She quickly apologized, preparing to let him go. But then, a new presence crashed into the scene. It was him, Alexander. He had arrived just in the nick of time. Isabelle froze in shock. The Emperor demanded to know her business here, but neither the Empress nor the boy dared to speak. They just stared. Alexander stepped closer, his aura imposing. He repeated the question, his voice low. "Isabelle, what are you doing here?" She did not answer. Instead, she fired back. "And what are you doing here?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. She calculated rapidly. He must be furious, angry enough to drag her personally from the shadows of Rue de Lancha. Wearing a dazzling smile, the Empress challenged him. "Did you come all this way just to scold me, husband?" If he was angry, perhaps he would finally exile her from the palace. But Alexander remained silent. His expression was an unreadable mystery. Finally, he spoke, pointing at the boy. "Who is that scruffy child?" Isabelle answered plainly. "I bought his freedom, and the others too." Then came the accusation. "Why were you trying to kiss him?" Isabelle gasped. That was a complete misunderstanding. Indignation flared within her. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I was only inspecting his injuries. Did he really think her so shameless as to romance a child? Alexander's gaze finally shifted, noticing the boy's wounds. The atmosphere shifted. The Emperor's anger evaporated, replaced by a wave of visible relief. He let out a breath. I am just grateful, he murmured. Grateful that nothing untoward happened. Such a rumor would have destroyed her reputation. Isabelle quickly reassured him not to worry, but her hands were shaking. She clenched her fists. Did you come because I visited the Forbidden District? Alexander's lips curled into a smile. Not at all, he said smoothly. Why would I be angry about that? Isabelle blinked, confused. What do you mean? He gazed at her in silence for a moment. Then, he leaned in close, whispering a secret meant only for her ears. The truth was shocking. Alexander owned this entire street. After taking the throne, he had used secret funds. He bought every business here. It was the perfect way to control the underworld from the shadows. A low chuckle escaped him. His hands remained firm on her shoulders, trapping her in his gaze. Even my secretary doesn't know, he confessed. I am telling you this because you are my empress. He flashed a winning smile. You know what that implies, don't you? Isabelle stood there, stunned by the weight of his words. Her mind raced. This changed everything. No ruler would share such a dangerous secret with the woman he planned to divorce. This confession was a declaration, a promise that he would never let her go. It was a display of absolute confidence. He was certain their bond could not be broken. Knowing this secret bound her to him, like a spider's web. She was trapped. A wave of nausea hit her. She had been played. Irritation bubbled up inside her. She never asked to be part of this tiresome narrative. Taking a breath, she turned back to Caleb. Are you still determined? She asked. The boy nodded instantly. Yes. His small hands balled into fists. He raised his head, eyes burning with resolve as he gave the Empress his final answer. I want to be your knight, Caleb declared. Isabelle smiled gently. Then you must learn magic, she advised. Only then will you be strong enough to protect me. Oblivious to her rage, he simply asked a question. He wondered if there were many others of his generation at the Knights Academy. The Empress had merely suggested that this way the boy could find companions of his own age. With tears shimmering in his eyes, Caleb begged Isabelle to spare him from the academy. The sudden, desperate plea left her stunned. The boy's voice trembled as he confessed the truth. He had been tormented by other boys in his past, leaving him paralyzed with fear at the thought of returning to such a place. Isabelle's heart ached at his confession. It was truly tragic that someone so young had endured such cruelty. She couldn't help but wonder, had he already taken revenge on his tormentors like the villain in the original story, or was he simply a terrified child? Caleb wiped his eyes, promising to grow up strong. He swore he would learn everything he needed to make up for his weakness. Isabelle hesitated for a moment, weighing her options, but in the end, her heart softened. With a heavy sigh, she made her decision. The palace was crawling with guards, and Caleb could easily stay with the other servants. She had planned to keep him close for a year anyway. The boy scrambled to his feet, a radiant smile breaking through his tears. He asked if she truly meant it, if she really wouldn't cast him aside. Joy radiated from him at the thought of being her personal escort knight. He declared this the single happiest day of his meaningless existence. Isabelle smiled, satisfied with her choice, but her expression turned serious. She gently scolded him, forbidding him from calling his life meaningless ever again. The Empress looked him in the eye. She told him that no life in this world is without purpose. Every existence holds something precious. Caleb gazed up at her, his eyes deep with emotion. He absorbed her wisdom and promised to be more careful with his words from now on. Very well. Seeing that he understood, she turned her attention back to him. She was curious if there was anything else weighing on his mind. Isabelle asked what else troubled him. Suddenly, the protagonist heard him swear a solemn oath, dedicating his entire life and everything he owned to her service. Then, Caleb dropped to his knees. With trembling reverence, he gently took Isabelle's foot in his hands and pressed his lips against it. Isabelle flinched, startled by the gesture. She asked what on earth he was doing. He looked up with puppy dog eyes, claiming he felt obliged to please her every second. Quickly, Isabelle told him to stop kneeling. She chided him gently, warning that the dirty floor would ruin the fine clothes she had just given him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the palace, the atmosphere in the royal office was tense. Alexander looked visibly annoyed. A fire of irritation burned in his gaze as he signed papers. That brat. Caleb. He had become a serious eyesore to the Emperor. Did the boy really need to cling to Isabelle like a parasite? As a knight, he wasn't protecting anyone. He was just hovering. It grated on Alexander's nerves. He tried to calm himself, reasoning that this was his wife's decision, and she surely had a strategy behind it. He couldn't let his jealousy affect his relationship with her, no matter how much the boy's presence aggravated him. After all, he was the Emperor. It was beneath him to get worked up over such trivial, childish matters. Besides, he had a bigger headache to deal with. The long list of scandalous items Isabelle had purchased on Rudanchija, those purchases were a political nightmare. It was unheard of for an empress to spend money on that forbidden street, and the public backlash was brewing. The nobles were already circling, demanding an explanation and pushing for new laws to control her behavior. To make matters worse, tracking down everyone who saw the empress that day to silence them would be a logistical impossible task. However, compared to the contents of her shopping spree, the cleanup seemed easy. Apparently, Isabelle had bought extremely inappropriate items. He recalled that she had stashed them in a private compartment reserved only for the empress. They were items so compromising, so scandalous, that she had hidden them deep away in her drawers. Alexander paused. His wife was a brilliant strategist. There had to be a reason. If it were anyone else, he'd assume she was planning a seductive night with him. But with Isabelle, that was impossible. She rejected his every advance and spoke only of divorce. Alexander leaned back in his throne, the leather creaking under the weight of his confusion. He didn't want to make a hasty judgment. It was better to confront the issue directly. He stood up and began walking through the palace corridors. His mind raced with possibilities as he walked. If Isabelle actually wanted to spend the night with him. But what could he even do in his presence? The empress was always sharp, irritated, and impatient. The memories of their cold interactions flashed through his mind. The night he tried to kiss her, she had exploded in fury. Her behavior was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Yet, these unplanned moments moved like gears in a machine. Theoretically, her attitude should annoy him. But the truth, he wasn't bothered at all. Thinking about her fire, a shy smile tugged at Alexander's lips. He decided to approach cautiously and raised his hand to knock on her door, but his hand froze. From inside the Empress's room, voices drifted out. It was Caleb, saying things that made Alexander's blood run cold. The boy was murmuring about his gratitude, how he wanted to serve her forever, and refusing the expensive clothes she was offering him. Isabelle's voice floated back, asking if he really intended to reject her gift. She had bought those clothes specifically for him. No one else could wear them. Alexander felt a surge of pure irritation. It was the dead of night. Why were they whispering in her bedroom like intimate lovers? It was absurd. She rejected the emperor's gifts but bought luxury clothes for a servant. Rage consumed him. He threw the doors open with a crash. Isabelle's voice cut through the air, demanding to know why Alexander had stormed in unannounced. The emperor stood frozen, his hand gripping the doors of his wife's chambers with possessive force. He muttered a hollow apology for intruding on their private conversation, but his eyes betrayed him. He simply couldn't fight the burning curiosity consuming him about the scene before him. After all, what kind of knight dares to linger in the Empress's private quarters in the dead of night? A heavy silence fell as the three of them exchanged confused, tension-filled glances. Isabelle narrowed her eyes, asking what he was insinuating when he was the one who barged in like a storm. Terrified, Caleb dropped to his knees, his forehead touching the floor as he begged the Emperor for mercy. His voice trembled as he explained that the Empress was blameless. He had only come because she summoned him regarding the gifts she sent. But the protagonist raised a hand in front of the boy, commanding him to stop speaking instantly. Right in front of the Emperor, she ordered the boy to stand up. Hearing his wife declare that the knight had no need to apologize, it made Alexander's blood boil with fury. His fist clenched until his knuckles turned white. Isabelle met his gaze, asking coldly if she wasn't allowed to reward a subordinate for their unwavering loyalty. She pressed further, asking if he truly believed she would betray him with another man. They had already exhausted this topic during their last encounter, and she had made it crystal clear that such accusations were false. Alexander shot back that he didn't suspect her. No, his doubts lay with the boy, and whether that lowly knight truly knew his place. Isabelle revealed the truth. She was the one who called Caleb, not the other way around. The air grew heavy as husband and wife locked eyes in a suffocating silence. Internally, the Emperor questioned his own sanity. Why was he acting like this? He knew he should avoid wild allegations that would only fracture his fragile relationship with Isabelle. Alexander's fingers twitched with impatient energy. Isabelle watched him closely. Curiosity piqued as she waited for his next move. His mind drifted into the distance. The Emperor couldn't understand it. Why did all his logic crumble into impulsive chaos whenever he was near her? Finally, he snapped out of it and dismissed Caleb from the room. The night fled, leaving the imperial couple completely alone in the dim light. The night deepened. Outside the door, the boy stood in silence, shifting his feet anxiously as he glanced back at the forbidden chamber. Inside Isabelle's room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Our protagonist and her husband simply stared at each other, words dying in their throats. Alexander pierced her with those deep, mesmerizing golden eyes. But Isabelle stood her ground, warning him not to expect any comfort from her. He maintained that stone-cold, expressionless mask, simply asking what she meant by that. She replied that he clearly stormed into her room with a motive. The protagonist analyzed him, convinced that after his earlier outbursts, he was calculating his next chess move. Suddenly, Alexander's expression shifted completely. He whispered that the smarter she became, the greedier he would grow. Unfazed, Isabelle challenged him to watch her more closely then. She decided to offer a piece of advice. From this moment on, it would be wise for him to avoid actions that might displease those around him. Alexander was stunned by her boldness. He let out a dark chuckle, asking if an emperor should really concern himself with the feelings of others. He then asked what exactly he could do to bring happiness to someone. Alexander began to stalk toward Isabelle, claiming he was dying to know the answer. With a dismissive wave of her hand, she gave him the solution: forget the deals, forget the agreements, and simply divorce her. He sighed, calling it a terrible shame. Gently capturing her hand in his, he declared that was the one thing he could never do. He leaned down, pressing a reverent kiss to his wife's knuckles. The emperor confessed he would rather she ask him to kiss her feet because that would be infinitely easier than letting her go. Isabelle was left speechless, a deep crimson flush spreading across her cheeks. She stammered that his joke wasn't funny. Our protagonist didn't believe a word of it, calling him out for his arrogance. She accused him of not caring about her at all. Alexander didn't answer with words. He simply closed the distance between them. The emperor asked if she truly believed that lie. In a blur of motion, he extended his arm, and Isabelle couldn't react in time. Alexander seized his wife by the waist, pulling her flesh against him before laying her down onto the soft sheets of the bed. He whispered dangerously that she had no idea what he was capable of just to keep her by his side. She stared up at him, paralyzed by shock. Alexander gazed down at her with an intensity indistinguishable from affection. The emperor hovered over her, their eyes locked in a confused, intimate trance. He admitted that she continued to impress him. Twirling a lock of her hair around his finger, Alexander whispered that he could finally demonstrate his true sincerity. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her hair, but Isabelle wasn't charmed. She was becoming visibly distressed. Either he had lost his mind, or this was moving far too fast. Alexander just gave her a mischievous smirk. Our protagonist began to panic, saying his name as he cupped her face. In an instant, the gap vanished. Their breath mingled, and Alexander captured Isabelle's lips in a kiss. Finally, he closed his eyes, savoring the taste of her. But unlike him, Isabelle was definitely not swept away by the romance of the moment. Her hand frantically searched the sheets until she gripped a pillow. Suddenly, the passionate night took a violent, unexpected turn. The emperor's face turned red from the impact, breathless and panicked. Isabelle scrambled away from him. With a furious glare, she screamed at him to get out of her room. He looked dazed, so she repeated the command over and over until it sank in. The truth was clear. Our protagonist wasn't charmed. She looked absolutely terrified after that stolen kiss. Yet, back in the room, Isabelle clutched her pillow with trembling hands as Alexander offered a stiff apology. Leaving her chambers, he was struck by the sheer irrationality of his own behavior. It wasn't just the rage he had displayed. The image of her startled, wide-eyed expression burned into his memory. The emperor paced silently through the moonlit palace courtyard, his mind a storm of confusion. Why had he lost control like that? Alexander resolved to fix this mess, no matter the cost. But fear gripped him. He could not bring himself to voice his true desires. The ruler of the empire stopped in his tracks. He told himself he must have completely lost his mind. In a crisis like this, how could his thoughts be consumed by the memory of her lips? The aftershocks of that stolen kiss were far too devastating. Had he crossed a line? He paused, trying to rationalize the turmoil in his chest. Surely, feeling physical pleasure during a kiss was simply biological, was it not? Yet, the terrifying truth remained. Only Isabelle evoked this feverish reaction, making the situation even more bizarre. His blood boiled at the memory of finding her with that boy, talking intimately in the dead of night. Logically, given their political arrangement, taking concubines or lovers was accepted practice in the empire. It shouldn't be strange in a royal marriage. Furthermore, such freedoms were explicitly written into their marriage contract. Therefore, Isabelle summoning Caleb or a dozen other men should not have mattered. Yet, he was furious. What was the source of this blazing wrath? What darkness was plaguing the emperor's heart? Did he subconsciously crave a different dynamic with Isabelle? It went far beyond the cold alliance of their marriage. He yearned for intimacy, a sacred bond far deeper than mere formalities. He tried to settle his racing heart with that realization. Alexander didn't just tolerate her. He desired Isabelle with an intense, consuming hunger. She captivated him completely. The emperor wished to stand by her side, not just as a ruler, but as a partner in every aspect of life. Continuing his march through the courtyard, he fought a mental war to banish the memory of that kiss. Dwelling on these emotions would solve nothing. This vulnerability was alien to him, yet the experience was branded into his soul, impossible to forget. Meanwhile, chaos erupted in the Empress's chamber. A pillow sailed across the room, followed by another, until one landed squarely on Isabelle's face. She stood frozen for a moment, the soft fabric masking her flushed expression. Gripping the pillow tight, she let out a muffled scream of frustration. Kicking her legs in the air, she collapsed onto the bed, convinced she had gone utterly mad. Isabelle questioned her own sanity. Why had she kissed that man back? She knew he had initiated it, seizing the moment. But the humiliating truth was that she had enjoyed it. She had returned the kiss with passion. Her pride lay in tatters. Isabelle desperately wished her husband wasn't such a skilled kisser. With a groan, she flopped back down, deciding to bury the memory deep inside. Shattered by the emotional roller coaster of the previous night, she lacked the energy even for shopping. Staying in the sanctuary of her room seemed the only option. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps and voices broke her isolation. Curiosity piqued. She rose to investigate the commotion. A maid burst into the room, breathless, calling for the Empress. Isabelle demanded to know the reason for such unrefined noise. She explained that she wished for solitude today and dismissed the girl, asking her to return later. The young maid apologized profusely, but stood her ground. She revealed that the Emperor demanded Isabelle's presence immediately. Our protagonist couldn't believe his audacity. Was he insane? How could he summon her so casually after the tension of last night? Isabelle instructed the maid to feign illness on her behalf, but the girl insisted with trembling urgency. The matter was critical. Alexander's persistence was infuriating. All she wanted was to erase him from her mind for a few hours. However, Isabelle was too kind to endanger the maid, and truthfully, a spark of curiosity ignited within her. She needed to know what game he was playing. She told the maid to inform him she would arrive in 30 minutes. Sometime later, Alexander remarked that she had arrived swifter than expected. He would have waited an eternity if necessary. Isabelle had stormed into the royal office still wearing her nightgown, her hair a wild mess. What emergency could possibly justify dragging the Empress out like this? And that brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope this story has you hooked. What are your thoughts on this romantic tension? I honestly hope Alexander finally deciphers the feelings he harbors for our protagonist. It's so frustratingly cute. Who do you suspect is plotting in the shadows? Do you believe Isabelle will succeed in getting her divorce? Or will a change of heart lead them down a new path? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you're craving more, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. The title of this masterpiece is Divorcing My Tyrant Husband, and our recap has covered up to chapter 30.